Award. And it's the Excellence Award. It's a prestigious accolade presented to honor individuals within city or county government who have demonstrated exceptional dedication, innovation, and leadership in fostering urban and regional development. This award specifically celebrates those on the front line who go beyond their regular responsibilities to profoundly impact our community's growth and prosperity. So this year's award winner, they've said, was an incredibly knowledgeable individual, and he was never too busy for the citizens in Fort Worth. He always returns calls or emails. He's never afraid to say no, professionally, of course, and will work with you to try to get to a yes if at all possible. And when conflicts between departments happen, he picks up the phone and even gets in the truck and doesn't rest until it's resolved and a better, safer solution is found. He's an amazing partner to the Fort Worth commercial real estate industry and a true asset to the city as a whole. And so it was the Real Estate Council's honor to award their first Excellence Award to Senior Fire Protection Engineer Bob Morgan of the Fort Worth Fire Department. So bring Bob up and the team. See if Chief Harrison or others would like to say a few words.
Yep, thank you very much, Ms. Bergdorf. First, I'm a little bit nervous. Normally when I'm talking about Bob, it's behind his back. So we're so proud that he got this award, and he's so deserving. I don't think there's a way that I could really emphasize to you all, to the city, just how important and how good Bob is at what he does. You can imagine all the challenges that go into development and trying to get everything to meet up with the code and the different needs and demands of everybody involved, and Bob finds a way to get us all there. And he does it in timely manner. If you call him, he's gonna pick up the phone. And we're sitting around scrambling, trying to figure out solutions, and he'll walk into the room and say, did anybody think of this? And of course we haven't, because he is the expert in the room. And we're just really proud that he got the award, and glad that you're taking time to recognize him. So thank you very much, Bob.
They said I wasn't going to have to talk. Thank you. It was great to get that kind of recognition. You kind of strive for that, 30 years of doing this, in the fire protection industry. So it was an honor to serve the citizens of Fort Worth and the city of Fort Worth. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Great job, Bob. Next, we have a number of informal reports. So the first one is on federal housing programs update. And Sharon Berkeley from Neighborhood Services is available if you have any questions. Sharon, come on forward. Looks like a question.
Good afternoon, yes.
I had a couple of questions. As I went through this IR, there's a pretty significant cut to the CDBG grants. That's redundant, but the CDBG program.
Yes.
And then some other significant funding sources. And so I'm curious as to how, practically speaking, as that, trickles down, what are the anticipated impacts on the city of Fort Worth, and what programs could potentially we be looking at less than previous year's funding?
Okay, for the upcoming year, we're anticipating at least level funding, possibly not an increase. So right now, I don't think there's an anticipation of any reduction in any programs or services.
You said this year. Are you anticipating it to funnel down next year, that we would see?
No, it's been further consistent over the last 4 or 5 years at that $12 to $13 million allocation. When I was looking at it, the last increase or larger amount was in 2020, and before that in 2010. Okay. But it's been right at $12 or $13 million over the last few years.
And so even with that significant cut, we don't think it'll impact us?
No, you're talking about the cut at the federal level?
Yes.
Okay, no.
Okay.
We're not anticipating that, because there has been cuts, but primarily it's been, and this is from reports from the National Community Development Association, that we're anticipating at least level funding is what we're requesting. Gotcha. Without possibly not much increase.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, okay. Our next informal report is on general obligation bonds for affordable housing. And Christiane Simmons and Chad LaRoque are available if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you, David. I do have some questions, but I want to kind of get an overview of what we have presented before us.
Do you want to do the overview from the department?
Hi, Chad LaRoque, Neighborhood Services. This informal report went over obligation of housing bonds for cities in Texas. Fort Worth, really the largest city in Texas, has not had a general obligation bond election for housing. So in the study, it included Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and also Denton was included. And we also had just went out and looked at some peer cities out of state, and that included Charlotte, Raleigh, Albuquerque, and Kansas City, I believe.
So when I'm looking at the report, one of the questions is that we don't even have a category that considers housing as a bond option when we talk about our bonds.
Yeah, we have not included housing in the bonds in the past, right? For the 2026 bond, we don't have our draft categories just yet. So it's certainly still on the table. And we do have a project in hand from Neighborhood Services that would consider adding affordable housing to the 2026 bond.
In with neighborhood services or on a separate bond? I mean, on a separate category?
It would probably be a separate category that was just housing, but those aren't quite drafted yet. So we have to sort of compile other projects that we received in the lab and create draft categories based on like how they group together. But I'm assuming it would probably be separate.
Okay, is Victor Turner here?
No, I think he has some stand-ins today, like Chad and Sharon. Mhm.
Okay, how would it look if it's in the neighborhood services?
Oh, go ahead.
So I know that Amy Turner and Victor had submitted a bond proposal, and it would be for $100 million. And that would be capital funds for housing for single family, for sale housing, and I believe also some maybe for homelessness and for the community land trust.
I was just going to add, so from a legal perspective, when we do bonds, there's a requirement that you have one proposition per topic. So we would have a specific bond proposition for housing. As far as how the funds are used, as you'll see in the IR, lots of cities do lots of different things. Some do supportive infrastructure, some do housing for homeless. So the programming of the bonds could be different, but it would not necessarily get rolled up into a larger proposition. That's just because it's state law requires one topic so that the voters can decide on each subject matter.
Right, and in the past, we have not ever considered housing as being as one of those one categories or topic, and I think that's what I want to bring to the city of Fort Worth. How do we get there to make that a category to let the people?
I believe you'd asked Mr. Cook to add it to the list. He's over sitting right there.
So what I'll say, we're at that part of the process where we're beginning the discussion on the bonds for 2026. There is a limited amount of bond capacity, right? And so whatever we spend in one area is dollars that aren't available in another area. So we will be bringing a total package to the city council at some point in time that talks about parks and recreation, it talks about police and fire facilities, it talks about transportation projects. And if we want to consider affordable housing as part of that, it simply competes for the same dollar with all the other capital infrastructure that the city has to implement. So, but we're at that point in the process that could be part of it.
Sure, I like that. And Mayor Pro Tem, I know this is it's an IR, not a presentation. Maybe we'll get one down the road quickly. But we have some representatives from the Homeless Coalition here, Housing Channel. Is it okay if they can have a word or two of what this would look like if we're able to put something in our bond?
I have no issue, City Attorney. It's on topic.
Okay. Do one of you like to come up and have a conversation? Thank you. And then also let us know who else we have in the room. I mean, that's a nice dress. I guess you didn't think you was coming online today, did you?
Gotta be ready for council. Okay, hello, everyone. Lauren King, Executive Director for Tarrant County Homeless Coalition. So I think we've looked at a number of different ways that this bond could be used, and honestly are using the Affordable Housing Strategic Plan as the guide for that, as that recommendation. And so, and I mentioned too, when you all had your workshop on February 13th, I don't know how we are, as a community, going to raise the capital if we don't do some kind of bond. Perhaps there is another tool, but I don't know how to raise the capital otherwise. Homelessness, it could look a lot of different ways. Most cities, I will say, use it for PSH capital. So that is a way to fund the PSH that's needed there. But could do a lot of different things. I know that we have come together as a group for affordable housing developers, everyone from PSH to home ownership. And so there's lots of ideas there as well, making sure that homelessness is included, multifamily is included, and then also home ownership is included as well. So really trying to get that real gamut of affordable housing represented there.
Donna.
Hi, Donna Vaness, President of Housing Channel. I just have a couple of things to add. Included in the IR, you can kind of see that for every dollar of bonds, you have anywhere from $6 to $9 in private money that helps augment and basically support what the city's putting in. And I think all of that information that you've received in the IR shows that, you know, with that commitment from the city, there's private dollars that are added to really make a robust program. And everybody's talking about it in all the cities all across the nation about affordable housing crisis. And our city, Fort Worth's done a fabulous job of creating, you know, economic development opportunities, jobs. We really need to support that workforce with affordable housing.
560.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you, Donna. And I'll just say my 2 cents and let it pass. I think Beck may have something. I think we've done a good job in our bond packages as it relates to police, fire, as it relates to parks and recs. And I think this is just another tool we need to do as it relates to housing. If we're the 13th largest city, and we like to say the fastest growing city, then we gotta make sure we take care of our housing and our residents and make sure that it is affordable for those that need it. So those are my 2 cents. I hope that we can really eagerly look into adding that as a topic and a category for our next 26 bond.
I'll be gone.
I just want to echo Councilman Neto's sentiments. We talked a lot about this on the NQRC, and I just want to say, as we prepare for the bond, I would like to see an option available of including a housing proposition. I know sometimes we get things spoon-fed to us, and it's no knock to anyone, but this is not one of those instances where we have something baked. I think it's important that as a council we have a discussion about what does it look like and give it a fair shot to do that. I also think, especially on the home ownership side, this creates a catalyst to create generational opportunities for assets in a period when people are asset limited. We've heard a lot about Alice, and this is an important investment in the residents of Fort Worth. And so I see a lot of upside potential to us considering this proposition. So I fully support what Councilman Nettles is saying. I would love to have that discussion and maybe a presentation in the future.
David,
All right,
you're doing.
next informal report, moving on. Next informal report is on the Priority Repair Program, and Sharon Berkeley is available if there are any questions.
I want to hear a lot about that.
Sharon, once again.
And Sharon, when you're giving an overview, please give some examples that people can really relate to understand what it takes to be eligible.
Okay. Good afternoon again. Our Priority Repair Program under Neighborhood Services administers home repairs, low-income to low-income, single-family homeowners. Our typical applicant is an elderly individual that has lived in their home for multiple years that may have not been able to maintain the upkeep. This can include flooring, plumbing needs, roofing, windows that need repaired, et cetera. The program is administered with our Community Development Block Grant, and recently has added general fund to that funding source. Over the last 2 or 3 years, we've had increases in both the grant funds as well as the general fund. We recently, about 8 to 10 years, allocated about $1 million each year of grant funds. In the last couple of years, we've increased that to nearly $3 million of our grant funds. Previously, we did not have general funds, and in this last budget, we were approved for $2 million to add to that, so that's nearly doubled what we have been allocating for our priority repair program. We also increased the maximum amount of eligibility for the program from $5,000 annually to a maximum of $25,000 over a 2-year period. And this has helped us to be able to more comprehensively serve the homes versus kind of doing a patchwork or a piecemeal repair. So instead of, if there is a repair that's needed on a roof, instead of just being able to replace exactly where the damage is, a fourth, a half, a portion of a roof, we're able to replace a full roof. We're able to do roofing, HVAC, and flooring to increase the assistance that we're able to provide to the homeowners. We have, what the IR is addressing is our update. And so we've encountered a few challenges along the way. While we have been able to add money, we've been able to serve more individuals to do more comprehensive work. It has kind of slowed down our time, that has increased our wait list. It has caused a minor challenge between different trades having to coordinate services because we don't want, or would prefer not to have several contractors going multiple times to a homeowner, so they need to coordinate that to be able to provide all of those services at once. Some of the adjustments and recommendations we are proposing to address our challenges is to increase the number of inspectors. We did not have a staff increase because all of the funds went to the actual program. So we're looking now to increase 2 rehab techs to help with managing the additional work that's needed. And then we're also issuing a RFP, or I think it's called an ITB, invitation to bid, to attract additional contractors to assist with the program. We currently have 4 that are working the program. We haven't increased contractors, even though we've increased the amount and the number of persons that are requesting services. And then we've also established our prioritization rubric that highlights persons, particularly the elderly, particularly those that are disabled, to a higher priority level to be able to be assisted more quickly.
So we only have 4 contractors?
At this time, but we're working on issuing an ITB to get additional contractors. Yes, ma'am.
That's all. I'm not running this part. This is David, so I get a chance to talk like you all. But what I will tell you is the priority repair program is key to helping elderly people stay in their homes. And every district in the city has people who have used this program. And so just know that it's very important. So, David, I turn it back over to you.
He has a question. Charlie.
Okay.
So one, thank you for that information. Just to make sure we're stretching those dollars out to make them go a lot further, are those rehab techs, are they working with insurance companies as well? For example, the roofs, to say, hey, there's a storm in the last few years, it could actually be covered under insurance, and then helping that family out, because obviously we know a lot of insurance adjusters out there may not want to let that claim, and especially if it's an elderly couple who, they're like, okay, I take your word for it. Are they working with those insurance companies to say,
Yes, that's a
hey,
part of it.
okay,
Part of
awesome.
the process.
And then in the application process too, are they identifying whether or not they're a veteran as well? Because in that way we could stretch those dollars by sending them over to Forward Homes and then using that grant money from Texas Veterans Commission rather than using this pot of money. Is that happening too?
They are, and we also have a veterans assistance funding within our department. And so we refer it over to our own program.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
I have a question. We have 4 contractors. Is that our limit, or is that just who has applied to be contractors?
As far as I understand, that's just been traditionally the contractors that we've used, working with the city and working within the confines of government regulations and contracts, kind of limit sometimes the availability of contractors, but there's not a limit to it. It's just what we're able to manage.
Okay, and so when we talk about, and these probably are normally small contractor firms or agencies,
Yes, I believe so.
and I know sometimes smaller firms are neglected or hesitant to come and do these type of contracts because the payment or being paid or reimbursed for the work that they're doing or the turnaround. Are we seeing those problems in this category?
I honestly don't think so. I think it's just the additional work, because these are longtime contractors that have a longstanding relationship with us. And usually, what I've seen is larger contractors generally prefer not to work with us because of the time delays and the restrictions with our federal regulations. And so these are, like I said, long-term contractors, and so it hasn't been an issue. It's just that we haven't increased the contractors since we made all the changes to the program.
But we're looking to do that.
Yes, we're working with purchasing right now.
Okay, and I guess whenever we get ready to open that up and send that out, if you could, send it to my office for sure, maybe Mayor Pro Tem, so that we can also send that information out to
Okay.
let people know that they
I'll
can
relate
apply
it to
to
our
be
department, our division.
contractors for the city of Fort Worth,
Yes, sir.
that department. Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Jeanette, then Jared.
How long are projects taking? Like, let's say, for example, roof replacement from start to finish. How long, what's the average time there?
I have to defer to our managers. I know right now, we have a wait list. And so I wouldn't want to guess, because I really don't know.
Oh,
at the
okay.
moment,
I
but
was just
will.
curious, because I've seen a roof being replaced in a day, and so I don't know if it's, the inspections, and then you have to get the contractors out for the roof replacement, and then just how many folks are waiting on services. We could get those rolling out pretty quickly, I guess, if we have new contractors that sign up. So we'll do our best to help share that out to these small businesses.
Thank you. I will say our biggest challenge is the federal regulations, because we have an inspection, we have environmental review process and other things that we have to go through before we can actually issue a notice to proceed.
Jared,
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Thank y'all for the work that y'all do in this program. It's really
are you in your
important.
microphone?
I am. Let me, can you hear me now? It's so hard let me just move this. Is that better, Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah.
Love you, dear. This program is really important, and I've been wrapping my head around this for quite some time of how do we help with the wait times, knowing that the longer some repairs are deferred, the worse the situation gets on that need. And so is there anything that we can do as a council to help streamline some of the process, or to help give y'all more resources to then reduce the wait times and serve those who are waiting on the wait list? And if you want to get back with the team, we can come back, but that's something I've been thinking a lot about, so wanted to put on the record here for y'all.
Okay. One of the things that we did suggest, that's a recommendation that I forgot to mention, is we're considering creating an emergency repair definition that will kind of separate persons with more critical needs. Particularly, it's identified HVAC repairs leading up to cold weather and emergencies, and particularly like water, sewer leaks, things like that. So that's one of the ways. Other than that, just kind of what we've identified, we're increasing our staff, contractors, technology. We're working internally to try to work on better streamlining the processes we have to work through.
I like the thought of a emergency prioritization. Totally support that. Would that take council action, or is that something y'all can do administratively?
It would be an internal, yes. It's just be a difference in the program design.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
David.
All right, our next informal report is on programs and policies to reduce evictions. And Tara Perez is available if there are any questions. The next one is on update on family homelessness, and Tara Perez is available if there are any questions on that as well. Tara?
Macy. Good afternoon, Lady T. Good to see you.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Tara. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
I just have a couple questions. On the allocation of emergency housing vouchers, how long are these families in emergency housing on average?
I can tell you a little bit about the voucher. My understanding is that the emergency housing vouchers, these are generally 7-year vouchers. One thing that's different about these is they're different than the housing choice vouchers that come through the housing authorities. So these went through our continuum of care. And so Tarrant County Homeless Coalition is the one that made the referrals for the vouchers. And one part of the program that's different is they're not refillable. And so as people leave the program, someone else is not able to come in. So they gradually decline over time.
Okay, so we're with this, we start with a set amount, and those are good for 7 years per family, or is it 7 years from the time that we have the vouchers?
7 years per household. I can find out if the clock starts ticking when they get the voucher. I don't think it does. I think that there's a hard 2030 deadline, but I can confirm that with you.
That'd be helpful, thank you. And then, let's see, for the emergency shelter in Fort Worth, so I know Salvation Army is closed. How many individuals can Broadway Baptist hold versus what Salvation Army can hold for emergency shelter?
Okay. Salvation Army has 60 beds. So this is not 60 households, this is 60 beds. Broadway can do 80 beds, and they usually run about 40 people per night at Broadway is what it's been averaging.
Okay, are they willing to do that this summer?
No. So Salvation Army is planning on reopening, hopefully at the end of April, beginning of May.
Okay.
And so we are working with Salvation Army and Broadway to have a smooth transition. So when Salvation Army Family Shelter opens, the families at Broadway Baptist will transition directly there.
Okay. And what about for overflow this summer? Is there a plan for that in case we do have an extremely hot summer?
Yes, there is we handle families a little bit different than our individuals, but yes, there's an overflow plan for families.
Okay, can you share that? Or do you want to get back to us on that?
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm in particular worried about families this summer. And then overall, prevention and addressing poverty with these families, is there any kind of emergency case management done when they receive a housing voucher for emergency services or put in emergency shelter to try to figure out why they're homeless and where they came from and what we can do to help them?
So one of the things the city did is when we had the family spike, originally we had been discussing as a community using these emergency housing vouchers for the chronically homeless. However, like as a system, we were responsive and we pivoted, and it's basically taking the same pie and carving it differently. And so a large amount went to families. And so the city was providing some funding for permanent supportive housing to match these vouchers. And so we opened up the city funding to help these disabled families. And so there is city-supported case management for the families on the emergency housing vouchers that want case management.
Okay, do we have enough case managers for that?
Yes.
Do you know what the ratio is between families and case management?
Our typical ratio is about 1 to 24. With families, we try to get that a little bit lower. There's not been a huge uptake for families. A lot of families prefer just the voucher without the case management. But for some of those families, we have been able to provide that because they requested it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Elizabeth.
I just want to thank you and Lauren King, who I see is in the audience. You know, when we got that, when y'all alerted us to the spike in family homelessness, it was alarming to all of us here on council. And we asked y'all to do something, and you did it. And so, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Let's see, next we're moving to municipal court. It's IR on the Fort Worth Municipal Court judicial reappointment and Chief Judge recommendation. And there's groups going to give you an update on this.
Thanks, David, Mayor and Council.
There.
So I'll just kick us off. We have an IR just providing an update on the judicial process and the Chief Judge hiring process. Back in November of 2023, Mayor and Council granted permission to former Chief Judge Danny Rogers, who retired at the end of last year, to come back and help with that hiring process. So as my partner in crime, he's here to provide that update.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. The information contained in the IR is correct, except for the timeline of presenting a recommendation to the Legislative Affairs Committee, which is supposed to be next week, and then an M&C 2 weeks following that. We simply have more work that we need to do before we're able to make the best recommendation, which we want to make to them and then on to you. So just wanted to clarify that for you. We're working well, and we will get back to you as soon as it's possible.
Same song.
Yeah.
Same song, 23rd verse, but let me say also, thank you for retirement. It is an awesome thing. And I appreciate all the time that I had with you, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the opportunities that I have now. So
Welcome back.
thank you. We'll be back again, I promise. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All righty. Next informal report is an update on meet and confer negotiations. And William Johnson is available if there are any questions. Any questions?
I'd like to see if the new father is alert enough to make an update. I heard he planned on not doing anything when the newborn came, but now he just moves rather slowly. Yeah,
Yes.
congratulations, new dad.
Thank you. On meet and confer, we started meeting last year in November with the Police Officers Association, exchanging information. And since the beginning of this year, we've had 3 meetings. Our next meeting, I believe, is going to be on the 25th of this month. And we're just exchanging documents and working with legal to work on a lot of the language. Our goal is to have, or to be ready to bring something forward to talk to council about before the end of this fiscal year. The current agreement will expire on September 30th, and then we will go into an evergreen period, which we want to avoid because that would not allow us to be able to provide salary adjustments and other things to our employees who work as part of the police department for a full year. So we'd like to, if we can, if at all possible, get something done before the end of this fiscal year.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because you're just so much slower in your delivery. Are you getting any sleep at all with the newborn?
Very little, but she's full of energy, especially at night. And mom and baby are doing just fine.
Well, congratulations. I'm sending a picture of you to your bride right now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the next informal report is on ordinances and practices related to the planting of native trees and native landscaping. And LaShondra Stringfellow is available if there are any questions.
I don't have any questions, but just a report, please.
LaShondra?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council, City Manager. So we provided this IR for you in response to native landscaping, and we included trees as well because there are 2 different aspects. And so what we have lined out for you are we do have requirements more specifically for the planting of native trees, but for actual landscaping, it's an actual option. So you can do landscaping, or you can do what we consider native shrubs and or grasses. If you're going to be planting any native shrubs and grasses, then there is a little bit different requirement than if you're doing other types of landscaping. Also, there is a different requirement I should also point out. If you're also going to be planting in the right-of-way, that's actually dealt by our Park and Recreation Department. However, Development Services will be looking at any planting of trees and landscaping on private property.
Do you have a question? I do, yes. LaShondra, I do have a question for you. And this is very specific, and I'm wondering if the plan articulates this, okay?
I know that the city doesn't have, well, does have some conservation districts. I don't know by how many, maybe you can count them on one hand. But thinking about conservation districts that are parkland, all right? For example, Circle Park Boulevard, okay? That was originally conceived to be large boulevards or oversized medians, right? That define, that particular neighborhood corridor. And the original intent was that oak trees were planted exclusively on each of those large medians. Over time, Parks and Forestry have begun to plant other trees there to a limited number just because of availability. But again, it was intended originally as a conservation district to have, oak trees. Now, I get it too. You want, biodiversity. You also want maybe some resistance of species to oak wilt, something like that, right? I get all that. But there are species of oak trees that can resist it. So does the plan articulate that particular item?
So that would actually be part of our right-of-way landscaping, and that is solely going to be determined by our city forester. So I'm not sure, maybe someone from Park and Rec could address that, Mr. Zavala?
Circle Park, Richard Zavala, Park and Recreation Department. Circle Park is part of the Kessler Plan and it anchors to the courthouse. So you well know that area. Yes, as we go in and replant landscapes, we're looking for diversity. So we don't run into one type of species and then you have an oak wilt decline or something like that. So it's a newer standard, but definitely I can share that with the city forester.
Okay. I guess my request would be if staff could look at it and keep it, say, within oak trees, because I think it defeats the purpose of the original creators that they wanted to, have oak trees exclusive there to that area. Just a thought. We can talk about it later on
Great.
offline.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Alan?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. LaShondra? So we've had some discussions related to trees as part of the Urban Forest Master Plan. And I want to thank you for those conversations. But one of the things we talked about was the street tree program, which you mentioned. And the question I posed then to you, I'll pose here now. And it's, we have these trees that are provided as part of the street tree program, but there are significant constraints because they're in right-of-way where many residents maybe not be able to take advantage. And so the question I asked then, and the thing I would like us to look at in terms of meeting our future urban forest master plan goal is those trees being available for planting inside the yard or a little bit further out of the right of way. And is that something that we can do?
Definitely. So we actually do have a requirement now that was added later on for plantings on single-family lots. But we realize that there's some, existing neighborhoods. And so we do have programs where we encourage property owners to be able to plant trees. They can get trees for free to plant in their yard. But one of the things that we're looking at, and actually it's one of the proposed recommendations in our Urban Forest Master Plan, is to find ways to expand, on that program. And part of that too is just education, letting people know it's even an option. So also, second to that, another recommendation is looking at how we can encourage more planting, more conservation areas in some of these newer single-family neighborhoods as well.
Thank you. Don't go far, LaShondra. The next informal report is on the proposed Panther Island form-based code text amendment for North Main Subdistrict.
Yes.
Councilmember
Okay.
Flores.
First, LaShondra, if you can give us an overview of that, then I have a question.
Most definitely. So what we're presenting to you today is actually you'll be seeing a resolution on the next council agenda. We're looking at two phases really of this particular code amendment. This first phase is kind of a way for us to be able to move forward some interest in development on Panther Island. And so it's relating to height as well as floor plates. So, and it's only in one of those sub-districts. So we're gonna be bringing that forward to the zoning commission as well as you, asking for you to approve this first code amendment. Now, we have a larger group of code regulations that we'd also like to amend. If the first one goes forward and we get approval from you, we'd also be moving forward with that second phase of code amendments as well. We want to put that RFQ out probably sometime this month or either in May.
Thank you, LaShondra. First, read this through, support it. I understand the idea of going through sub-districts and all that because there are areas of, Panther Island that can be developed differently and still attain, the required density that we want to achieve. So if you look at the inscribed map, it's clear that that highlighted corridor is what, is being intended here, by this, proposed text amendment. And to create, I guess, a corridor that leads into downtown and is complementary to what exists in downtown. So all that makes sense to me. Heard a couple of concerns, along the way, from some of these workshops and also individually from residents, so that we can kind of address this concern here for those that are tuning in. Concerns about increased, height. And I think it's necessary to achieve, if I understand this correctly, a necessary amount of density there so that you can keep the cost of living to a certain level, right? So it doesn't rise too precipitously. So maybe if you can just comment, how much do height, limitations come into play when you're thinking about, achieving that level of, density that you want and need on the island?
I see Dana coming forward with a lifeline. And then we'll have questions from council members Hill, then Beck, after Carlos finishes.
Yeah, if I may, since I've got to work on this with the Panther Island Steering Committee, LaShondra knows what she's talking about. I just want to give a little bit of color to some of the conversations she might not have been part of. But so we envision, as part of the Panther Island strategic vision update that you all heard in early March, we envision there being a future transit corridor connecting downtown and the stockyards and perhaps even down to the south to the near south side and beyond. And we also currently have 3 tower zones that are allowed by zoning on the periphery of Panther Island, the 2 islands really. And one of the ideas was that North Main is such an important corridor, it's a designated state highway, it's a very important north-south connector, that the height limitations today are pretty restrictive in an interesting way. There's a minimum height of 5 stories and a maximum height of 8 stories. And so it's a very narrow envelope that construction can occur, and it generally leads to stick-built construction between that 5 to 8 stories. We'd like to see high-quality development. We'd also like to allow for affordable housing, as we do have a downtown goal for affordable housing. We envision a similar goal on Panther Island. And in order to get the greater height, and also in order to deal with some impact fees for infrastructure that we have on Panther Island that we don't have in downtown and other parts of the central city, greater height will both get us potentially steel construction, get us the greater density to support transit, and we can also consider, when we do the broader form-based code update that LaShondra mentioned, we can also consider offering greater height as an incentive for an affordable housing or mixed income housing development. So those are conversations we still need to have, but we thought in the interim, with the update of the strategic vision, knowing how important North Main corridor is, and knowing that we've heard concerns about the constraining height limits that we have today, we wanted to go ahead and get this interim zoning text amendment moving forward while we have the longer conversation about the broader geographic area.
Okay. Thank you, Dana. Some questions for
Councilmember Hill, then Councilmember Beck.
Hi, Dana. I think this is for you. Can you give me just an overview of how the HRNA report and the steering committee influence the recommendations y'all are making? And I know this is a first step, and then we have a longer conversation ahead of us. But how did these all work together, and what the outcome is what you anticipate the outcome to be?
So I think there's a couple of things. One is they recognize that the zoning should be more flexible, and that was both with regard to minimum heights, maximum heights, and then also land use. So much of Panther Island is designated with neighborhood zones, N1, N2, N3, and that requires that the development be at least 2/3 residential. And so we'll be revisiting that component about the land use restrictions as well as the height restrictions. And then there are just also some changes. There were some very large blocks that were laid out in the original form-based code, particularly on the periphery of the existing block pattern that really were much larger than what we have on Panther Island today. And so that's one of the recommendations, is that we create a little bit smaller block pattern and allow some more pedestrian connectivity, which is a better, just urban development form. And so that'll affect both our subdivision ordinance and our zoning ordinance. That's what a form-based code does, is sort of addresses both at the same time.
And just a quick follow-up question, is that from HRNA or is that from the Panther Island Steering Committee?
So that's from HRNA. So,
Okay.
and Lake Flato, their subconsultant was Lake Flato, were the urban design experts that spent a lot of time looking at urban development patterns around the U.S.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. So you mentioned potential future changes that would be triggered by this change to the code. Can you give us, just broadly speaking, what we're looking at those changes would be, and how this change and those subsequent changes, generally speaking, impact the overall development of Panther Island?
Sure. I'll jump in if that's all right, just because I've got a little bit of the history on it. So staff, starting back in, I want to say, 2016, 2017, was looking at wanting to update the Panther Island form-based code. It was initially established in 2006, has had some minor updates since then, but there really hasn't been a major update to the code since 2006. And so the idea is that we would have the strategic vision, that we would be able to use that as a guide for updating the form-based code. And so it's everything, so it's not just the two islands, there's some areas off of the islands, even going up to Samuels Avenue and up Jacksboro Highway, Henderson, that have the PI, Panther Island zoning. And so it would be a full review of that existing zoning district. So again, to Councilmember Hill's question, it would be addressing the minimum and maximum heights, it would be looking at those land use restrictions, and then it would be looking at the block patterns, and in some cases, even the street design or street widths that are called for there.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Switching gears. Next informal report is the status of the Americans with Disabilities Act Compliance Plan, and Christina Brooks is available if there are any questions. All right. Next informal report is an updated marketplace availability analysis for business equity, veteran, service disabled, veteran-owned firms. Christina Brooks is again available if there are any questions.
Charlie.
Christina?
Hi, Christine, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, well, a lot better now that I saw this. This is super exciting. So again, thank you for all the work that's gone into this. As with anything that I ever ask for, request, just breaking it down Barney style for me to understand. So is this saying that in order to do this disparity study for VOSBs and SDVOSBs, it would take 6 months or 12 months, or are you just saying these are the different options, or can you break it down for me?
Yeah, so in the IR, we break down the different ways that we can analyze data around the availability of firms in the marketplace. So we're looking at two specific groups, business equity firms and then veterans and service-disabled veterans. And what our recommendation is to do an availability analysis for veterans and service-disabled veterans, which is probably the quickest analysis that we can do, just to understand how many are in the marketplace that do the work that the city usually contracts for, so that we could set goals if that's something that the council would like to move forward on. So that's probably the easiest way to go about this. The other portion that's covered in this IR is looking at updating the data analysis around business equity firms and what the marketplace currently looks like. When we concluded the 2020 disparity study for business equity firms, that data set that we used to conduct that analysis went from 2013 to 2018. So this would be a look at 2019 to present, understanding what the state of play in our marketplace is now. And it would not replace the goals that were established in the disparity study, but those numbers could help inform us as to any emerging trends in our marketplace as the community continues to grow and we attract new businesses here, what that looks like.
Gotcha. Okay, so in that case, what should we be getting out to our small business owners that are in, in Fort Worth, who are, or who would qualify as veteran-owned small businesses, who maybe they're not registered as such because there's no benefit to it? So like I know over at the chamber right now, Fort Worth Chamber, that's one of the things we're working on is polling just the chamber members on where they're at and then helping them with those certifications through the SBA so that they can be identified. So I guess whenever this kicks off, what should we be going out to our business owners saying, hey, make sure you're identified as?
Registered with the city.
Okay.
Make sure you're registered with the city. So we're working with our purchasing department. We have the new bonfire system. And so we want to make this as user-friendly as possible so that when contractors and vendors register with the city, it's a one-time process where they would identify what types of certifications they have. And veterans and service-disabled veterans certifications would be added to that. So they would just need to register as a vendor with the city, make sure that they're checking all the applicable certifications, and then we will be using those lists to reach out and make sure that all of our small businesses, business equity, and veterans are made aware of all of the contracting and vending opportunities that the city procures.
Okay, awesome. And then the unbundling contracts, can you explain that just really quickly?
Sure. So unbundling is really just looking at, sometimes we have large contracts that can be broken down by the specific work that's included in a contract. And sometimes that makes it easier to identify vendors and contractors that can do those smaller portions of a large contract. And so to the greatest extent possible within state Texas statutes and regulations, we try to make sure that those opportunities are available. So what we do in our department is we work with, sit down proactively with some of our project managers and identify the scope of work for some of the projects before the bid is advertised so that we can see potentially some opportunities for unbundling and targeting some activities within a project that could go to a smaller firm. And then make sure that once the bid is advertised, that we're reaching out to those businesses within our marketplace that could serve in that capacity and invite them to bid on a project.
Awesome. Well, I know that'll certainly help those contractors who, have those bond requirements and can't exactly get those huge bonds. So all great information. I think this would lend very well, especially to the priority home repair program with the vendors needed there. It's like a win-win for everyone involved. So thank you very much for the update. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And then the final informal report is on Upper LeBeau flood mitigation, flood infrastructure, financial assistance application. Jennifer, we have somebody with their hand raised already.
Councilmember Flores.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Hi, Jennifer. Hello. Good. I know, we had spoken before, about this, and I appreciate your staff's effort at getting, this needed funding, right, for, projects like this. Because it is as our, city continues to develop, this is going to be more omnipresent. So in the past, your team has provided the council with a timeline for flood mitigation projects based on what current available funding had, right? So if this project is selected, if we get grants, loans, combination thereof awarded, what is the project timeline for LeBeau specifically, would you estimate? I know it's a phase thing. I'm just wondering how that changed the original timeline, because we were looking, past 2020,
Right.
2035, somewhere around there, if memory serves, I can't remember.
So yeah, so with the fee increase that was approved in the fiscal year '24 budget, part of that was to help with the next phase. So not the full and complete project, but the next phase of Lebo, as well as two other large scale flood mitigation improvements. So if we got this grant funding for Lebo, it would accelerate that delivery, but I can't tell you by how much, because we don't really know how much we're gonna get. So we're gonna apply for as much as we feasibly could spend and can afford within our current policies and with the other commitments that we've made to moving forward. But because we don't know how much they're gonna give us, we don't really know how quickly we could do that next phase or how big that next phase could be.
Okay.
So once we find out that information, like how much we could actually get, then we can figure out, okay, this is how much that next portion can be and give you an updated timeline.
Sure, that makes sense. And since I like to, remain optimistic, if we were to get all we wanted, conservatively, how much could we accelerate, do you think?
I would have to go back to our team and like really look and see. But yeah, if the stars were aligned and we got this funding as well as the FEMA grants, the very cool part is that the FEMA grants have a local requirement. And if we actually got this flood infrastructure funding, that could be used to help contribute to the local requirement. So that would be awesome if we can get both. We just don't really know, but of course we're trying to get as much as possible because then that gives us more money to put towards our other commitments. So.
Got it. Okay, thank you. If you can get back to me.
Yeah.
When you kind of run, a hypothetical.
Okay,
So,
sounds
thanks.
good. Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, David. Any questions regarding changes in membership on boards and commissions for the April 9th meeting? Hearing none. Any questions regarding significant zoning cases for the April 9th meeting? Moving right along. Questions regarding City Council M&C log for April 9th. Any issues there? Councilmember Nettles.
I do have one, and I think it was number 13. We had a conversation about it earlier, and I think the approval amount was up to 2 million, but the 13 actually says 1.1. It's going to be.
So that's the additional. So council has approved already, I think, up to 995,000. So that's just the additional.
Any others? And with that, we have an update on the noise ordinance from Chief Aldridge. And Deputy City Attorney Melinda Ramos as well. Thank you for going to the right stand because you have good lighting there.
That's what I need, so I want to make sure I'm in the right spot. Melinda Ramos, City Attorney's Office, and as the Mayor Pro Tem already said, we're here to give you an update on the noise ordinance. Kind of the overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about sources of noise, the regulatory authority, the standards of measurement, and lastly, enforcement. And just kind of as a preface before we begin, all noises are sounds, but not all sounds are noise. And really what that is, right?
Wow.
This is what you all pay me for, so, I got to make it work, right? Sounds are what are heard by our ears, and noises are what we perceive to be unwarranted or unpleasant sounds. So people perceive those noises and sounds differently, and how it affects them is also different, can be different from person to person. So as you can imagine, noise complaints come in from a wide variety of sources and for a wide variety of reasons, from loud music, animals, barking dogs, automobiles, construction sites, mufflers, near residential areas. Most of the complaints that police receive are for loud music. These are noises that disturb the tranquility or quality of life of residents, and those can manifest themselves either in a physical way or affect the mentality of the person. Most of the complaints are received through the NPO, through their communications division, from council members. Alternatively, where you have animals involved, typically those complaints related to chickens, barking dogs, code compliance will often receive those in addition to the police department as well. So kind of the laws that are applicable to noise are both at the state level and at our local level here. At the state level, those are handled through the penal code, through the disorderly conduct, and when it's declared a public nuisance. In order to be declared a public nuisance for noise and disorderly conduct, a person has to commit an offense knowingly where they make an unreasonable noise in a public place, or alternatively, in or near a private residence that they have no right to occupy. They have to be given warning by a peace officer that that noise is unreasonable and a public nuisance, and then it has to hit 85 decibels, which can be very loud. What doesn't qualify, as you'll see here, is any noise that comes from a shooting range, because those are handled through another statute in state law. Now, kind of more locally, our noise ordinance in Chapter 23 was updated in 2012 to add decibel levels. Prior to that, it didn't have any. But it is designed to regulate noise by various alternative means in order to allow the police and, when necessary, the code compliance, to enforce these regulations at times when either there's not a sound meter available or when they have a person that is wanting to make a personal complaint. These noises can be in violation because it's disturbing to a person of reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities, or because it exceeds a certain decibel level restrictions that we have in our ordinance. Any noise that is in excess of the maximum decibel level that we have in our ordinance is during stated times. So we have daytimes and night times by which we have maximum levels. And the noise that is, it's measured for a duration of 30 seconds from the property line of the person that's making the complaint. Where we have a, yes, ma'am.
So how far from the property line do you measure the decibels?
So I'll have to defer to Aldridge, but typically what the officer would do is he would stand at the property, let's say it was a resident complaining about a business. That officer would go to the resident, take their complaint, go stand at probably the edge of their property, maybe the edge of their driveway, right, is where typically you would imagine the property line to be, and then take the decibel level, the sound meter reading, and see what the decibel level was.
Okay, so there's not like a 300 feet or a 50 feet rule around the property line. Okay, thank you.
When there is not a decibel level or the sound meters won't capture the decibel level, the officer would still have the discretion to write a citation for noise if they have a person who, as I stated before, it disturbs them in a reasonable person of ordinary sensibilities that would make, cause, or suffer or allow an unreasonable noise at such manner and such volume that it disturbs that person. It can vary. What bothers one person may not bother another person, so the officer is really using their discretion at that point in time to make that determination. But for this particular violation, he does need a witness. So the person that's the complainant would need to be the witness for the citation.
Councilmember Blaylock.
So I have a question. It may be a little obtuse, but District 10, we're blessed with lots of little pockets of ETJ. And so what happens if we have a noise complaint from a City of Fort Worth residents about a noise or a firework that's coming from a street away in the ETJ?
So, right, it would be in the county. We don't enforce our ordinances in the county, and I will just offer that counties right now don't have the authority to enact any kind of noise ordinances themselves. There have been a couple of bills that have been tried in the past, but they've not gained any traction for them.
Next.
Melinda, I don't know if you're getting to this. If you are, I can, wait until you reach that slide. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about entertainment districts.
So we're getting there.
You getting there?
Yeah,
I'll
we're
wait
getting
then.
there.
Okay.
Councilmember Beck. Oh, I'm gonna wait till the end. Okay.
Oh.
So we do have a number of exemptions right now built into our noise ordinance, and they are generally related to our entertainment type of facilities that we have here in the city, ranging from Texas Motor Speedway, Public or private school properties where it's permitted by the owner. So the biggest example of that would be TCU in their stadium. An outdoor event that's permitted by the city. Panther Island at their event venue that where it seats 1,000 persons, you can have amplifiers that would be exempt from our noise ordinance. Anytime any of the governmental bodies are doing work in the streets, those are exempt from the noise ordinance. Vehicular traffic, railway, and airport traffic is exempt. And our drilling and production is exempt, but they are exempt because they have their own noise requirements that the operators are required to meet, both the gas wells and the compressor stations that they're required to meet. They have to submit a noise management plan where they have to account for what the ambient is in the area. I believe they have to do a 72-hour study, put that in, and then once they either drill, refrac, or have a compressor station, it can't operate during the daytime any more than 5 decibels above the ambient, and at night 3 decibels of the ambient. So they're covered under a completely different noise kind of requirements, so they're not in this particular ordinance. And then-
Councilmember Hill.
And I have a ton of questions, but I want to make sure this is applicable. Do fireworks, are they considered under the noise ordinance, or they have a separate ordinance?
So fireworks can be considered under this noise ordinance.
But the exemption, if they had a permit, like Colonial or TCU, shooting off fireworks, they have to pull a permit for that. And so they would be exempt?
Right, so TCU, they pull a fireworks permit. All of these, I don't think they have to pull they wouldn't specifically be exempt under this because they don't get a separate special events permit or outdoor events permit.
Okay.
But they have been considered to be exempt with their fireworks. It doesn't mean that somebody couldn't still want to make a complaint about fireworks noise. It's just been my experience that typically it's one person complaining for a particular area, or the complaints may stem because of the time by which the fireworks go off. I know that there was a case last year with an event on Panther Island where the fireworks didn't go off until after midnight. And so, of course, that creates a noise disturbance that I know we got complaints about. That is being addressed through a separate amendment to the fire code that will be coming forward to the council at some time at one of your April meetings.
Okay.
And it will address kind of noise also.
Okay, then I'll hold the rest of my questions to the end. Thank you.
And then lastly, normal building conditioning and ventilation and property maintenance is exempt. That's not to say that if you or a resident experiences their neighbor's air conditioner making a high screech or a high whine, that they can't call development services, and they'll have an inspector go out and ensure that that air conditioner or whatever the particular machinery may be is operating the way it's supposed to be. So this is just a, did you have a question, Carlos? No, oh, sorry. This is just a visual depiction of the range of noise and the decibel levels that they are. All the way from 30 decibel levels where it's rustling leaves, all the way up to 140 where it's a gunshot. Fireworks can range depending on the degree. They can be all the way up to 140 as well. Sounds are harmful to the ear, to the person in your hearing, once it reaches 85 decibel levels. How these noises are perceived may depend on, if it's seasonal, the prevailing winds, the weather, whether or not there's any kind of vegetative cover, and the topography. So these are on average, but on any given day, that may not be the decibel level that sound meters may catch them on. It may be louder or it may be softer. So within our noise ordinance, we do have maximum decibel levels in there. They are set roughly by zoning districts: residential, non-residential, mixed use, downtown, Panther Island, West 7th, and then other zoning districts, which do include the form-based codes, including the other entertainment districts of the Stockyards and of near Southside. Generally, for the residential districts, daytime for all of these, with the exception of what you'll see for West 7th, downtown, and Panther Island, is 7 to 10 p.m. and then 7 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. So in residential areas, during the day, the max you can have is 70. The nighttime, it's 60. For commercial areas, it is 80 dBA, and nighttime it's 70. For the downtown, Panther Island, and West 7th areas, from Sunday through Thursday, during the daytime hours, it's at 80 dBA, and at night from 10 to 7, it's 70 dBA, but on the weekend, from Friday to Saturday, it's from 7 to 2 a.m., it's 80, and then from 2 a.m. to 7, it's 70. As I said before, for all our other zoning districts that aren't covered in the 3 categories above, during the daytime, it's whatever the existing ambient is plus 3 dBA, and then at nighttime, whatever the existing ambient is for the area. So we do include buffer yards, not in the zoning ordinance, and really those are designed to screen or block vision or noise pollutants along the entire length of the boundary between 1 and 2 family residential districts and the adjacent non-residential districts, which can be either our commercial districts or industrial. It consists of open space of grass, other landscaping, a masonry wall, or a wood fence, either alone or in combination. And here's how these are set out, specifically with regards to our non-residential districts, so both the commercial and the industrial. As you can see, it really relates to where the building is set back and then where the buffer yard is, and that is that 5 foot, generally 5 foot of area where it has to be that landscaping as stated above. For the industrial districts, there is a bit more. The building is set back at 50. And when it's adjacent to residential, then the buffer yard is set to 20 where that grass and vegetation has to occur. For those industrial districts, the zoning ordinance requires a minimum planting of trees, a minimum of 2.5 inch calipers and shrubs for a vegetated screen. If you're planting medium trees, they have to be planted every 15 feet on center. If you're planting large trees, every 30 feet on center. And the shrubs are meant to grow between 8 feet tall and be planted in between the trees. I will add, just as a caveat, is that from all of the buffer yards, you are allowed to park in that buffer yard, so that can mitigate the effect of having that setback, and if its intent is really to provide any kind of noise mitigation. So I'll turn it over to Aldridge to handle the enforcement.
Melinda, before you do that, before the chief gets underway, just wanted to, sorry, chief, wanted to ask you maybe how legal looks at this. I mean, in the definitions, I forget which slide you presented, when you talk about a normal person being bothered by an unreasonable level of noise, sound, whatever you want to call it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, how does the law look at, say, someone with a disability that's not readily apparent, but loud sounds could, create a problem, like an autistic person?
In terms of whether or not a citation will be written?
Well, how's that apply?
So I think the law would generally look at, and what a judge is going to generally look at, or the court is going to generally look at, is how it affects a reasonable person. So it's an average person standard, right? So I think the court would assume that it's not a person with extra sensitivity to noise, however the case may be. I think, and I'll age myself here, when I was doing research on this, I was reading that people who are prone to be bothered by low frequency noise, it can really manifest itself through being nauseous, through being physically sick, and that typically happens to people when they're 50 to 59, and I won't say where I am in that range, but it typically happens to that. So, I mean, noise, there are special, perhaps, medical conditions that can create noise sensitivity, but sometimes just with age, you can have noise sensitivity as well. But a court would look at what is an average reasonable person. They would look at kind of what is the nature and the extent of the interference, how long it lasts, how long it reoccurs, and how much it interferes with daily life is what really the court's going to look at when you're going to prosecute a case based on a noise citation.
Okay. And you mentioned noise management plans, right, as they apply to compressors, like natural gas compressors, right? Does this apply to open-air concerts?
So we don't have in our ordinance right now, our regular noise ordinance, we don't have a similar requirement for noise management plans like the gas well ordinance does. So the gas well ordinance was written more robustly to address the particular noise issues that were coming up during the height of the gas drilling phase. And so there's a specific plan for that that requires the operator to take into certain things related to kind of what the noise impacts are from what they're making with their machinery to establish, as I said before, the ambient for the area and how much they're either drilling or the compressor is going to impact that. And then to also provide other mitigations, whether it was enclosing the compressor station or putting up sound walls. It's kind of its own little separate set category within the gas well ordinance that is not part currently of we don't require any kind of noise mitigation plans or anything related to that, any permitting in our current noise ordinance.
And what I'm trying to do is segue into a specific area like Panther Island, right? As an example, the Ooby Dooby concert, right? Okay. The outdoor events ordinance, by the city, it administers and enforces over city-owned property, but it does not, say, for example, have any purview over TRWD-owned property, right? Like you would find over in Panther Island. So they're not required to do that as it stands because we don't have a plan to
Right
request that.
Right now they are carved out, they are exempted from our noise ordinance, specifically their entertainment venue that seats 1,000 persons. It would be a decision of the council if you wanted to continue to exempt them from the noise ordinance, or if you wanted to amend the ordinance to remove that exemption and make them subject to our maximum decibel levels. You could, at that point, the council could either consider adding them to the maximum decibel levels that are included for the downtown Panther, that area where the maximum is 70. It would, at that point, be your choice. But right now, we don't have any requirements for that venue because it's exempt under our ordinance.
I'd like to keep that option open, for further discussion. But just in the interest of getting through these couple of other questions that I have, I think I covered most of it. Okay, last one for entertainment districts, okay? And I'm thinking of the stockyards in particular, all right? Very popular place, but what we see is that especially during certain times of the day, of the evening, you get not just, showy cars, but loud cars or trucks going in there, whether it be by music or by virtue of their exhausts, right? Their exhaust systems are just loud, especially when they rev engines. That's including motorcycles as well. So it's an entertainment district, right? There's a lot of, outdoor activities going on. There are folks on the PA. I get it. Sometimes there are people, playing music at the corners. Fine. How would we possibly adjust, our noise ordinance to maybe be a little more specific? For example, police and Chief Aldridge, I'd love to hear what you have to say on this. Maybe they're put upon a bit to try to make a judgment call. For instance, when you have all this other ambient noise going on, and then you have a point source noise that is of particular disturbance level, right? Because I've gotten complaints before by retailers that have in good weather, their shop doors open, right? You have outdoor diners, and they're like, you know what, this would be better, but not for that guy over there, loud on his, megaphone, saying something, right? Expounding his First Amendment rights or whatever it is. That kind of thing. Because then it starts affecting business, the conduct of business. So maybe, I don't know if you're prepared to answer that, but again, like the exemption for Panther Island, I would like to look at that further, maybe how we can better refine it.
So for entertainment districts, I know the chief will get into other cities that they looked at in terms of enforcement and how they're enforcing. When I looked at those cities and what their noise ordinances required, many of them had permits that they required for certain types of entertainment venues for their noise, and they put limits on those, within those permits related to that, and if they went beyond that, then they would revoke their permits related to that. I think I'll defer to the chief for how to address vehicles. I think it would be difficult for a police officer when it's the muffler or anything like that, to be able to use a sound meter to try to measure that, because our ordinance right now requires a 30-minute, not a 30-minute, a 30-second measurement. So I'm not, they have more experience in terms of related to that. I think we have to be very careful with First Amendment and folks that want to be on the sidewalk and be able to have their say.
Exactly.
There's certain kind of case law that's related to amplification that we can look at what's in there now, but I don't know how much we could really successfully regulate that and not infringe on somebody's
Yeah.
First Amendment right.
And a lot of it has to do with location, right?
That's correct,
Because some
right.
people will say, sure, they can say whatever they want, but I have my family here, there's a long way to the restaurant, the only available seating is outdoor, and I have to put up with that?
I mean,
Anyways.
certainly our department's always willing and ready to work with the police department when issues like that related to come up to find a solution that we're respecting First Amendment rights, but also respecting
Yeah.
the folks that go down there to enjoy the stockyards or any entertainment center
Right,
that we
and
have.
sometimes said First Amendment, rhetoric can be a little volatile, especially to young ears. But anyways, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Chief?
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, council members. It's good to be in front of you today. So I know this is one issue that is frustrating to a lot of the constituents that you guys represent. I get a lot of phone calls, not only from you guys, I get emails, text messages. I get a lot of things from you guys about just noise. So whenever we talk about the penal code, peace officers can enforce the penal code. That's the chapter that Melinda talked about a little bit earlier. But the code can be enforced by either code compliance or us. But the reality is that really whenever you're talking about noise ordinances, it's us. I mean, 99.9% of the time it's us, unless you're talking about a barking dog or something like that. So, usually we try and give verbal warnings and, we can issue citations if we need to. Our whole goal is to gain compliance. We want people to live in harmony in their community without disrupting everybody around them. So, I mean, if we went around and wrote citations for people at birthday parties, quinceañeras, you name it, we don't want that hard feelings between the community that's just trying to celebrate a very happy event and maybe not aware of what the noise ordinances are. So according to the city ordinance, the fine's not more than $500. So the next two slides, I couldn't fit it all on one slide. It's very busy reading if you look at it, but I looked at the calls from 2022 and 2023 for loud music and parties. Those are same category if it's a loud music or party. You can see we had about a 9.2% increase from 2022 to 2023. During that 2-year period, we got about 17,000 calls. So out of the 17,000 calls, we pretty much, took some sort of enforcement action 117 times, either a citation or if a report was written, a citation was issued after the fact. The next slide is going to look fairly similar except for more calls, just with 2023 data. And you can see, I broke it out if the disposition that was set on the call, whether they were gone on arrival, there was no action taken, the call was canceled, officers were unable to locate, or if a report or citation was issued. And so I really kind of want to talk about a little bit of the challenges for law enforcement. One is loud music calls are, for the most part, low priority calls. So they kind of get put down on the list a little bit, and we answer the higher priority calls unless there's, somebody's life that's in danger. And by the time we get to it, usually the noise has probably been turned down or the party has ceased altogether. Maybe the noise doesn't rise to the decibel limits. As frustrating as it may be to them living in the house, Every division has decibel meters, and we can test the decibel levels at the property line to determine if they meet that limit. A lot of the times, complainants just want to be anonymous. And so if we don't meet the decibel limit, but yet it's still inconvenient to them, we need a witness for the citation. So we need somebody to say, yes, I'm more than willing to go to court to say, it disturbed me to the point I called the police to have a citation issued. But a lot of the calls that we really get, they are either anonymous or concerned citizens. So, and there are times whenever we go to a loud music call that people don't answer the door. Yeah, go figure that. They don't want to talk to the police. The only remedy we have with that is that we can write a report and issue a citation later, but it doesn't solve the problem for the night. So that's a very big challenge for us whenever that does occur, because guess what? It's going to continue to disturb people throughout the night, and we're going to continue to get calls. So whenever I was looking at this, I was able to, send out a feeler to a lot of different agencies. We got 12 replies from across the country and actually into Canada. The reality is that most of the agencies do exactly what we do. They try and gain compliance through, cooperation to get the music turned down. There was one that had a licensing committee that could revoke permits for businesses. And there were a couple of agencies that allowed, again, to revoke the establishment's permit. There was one department that had a positive interaction program that kind of met with the community whenever they have problems. But as you know, we have MPOs that have meetings with community members all the time. And so if there's a problem location, no matter what side of town, if it's a loud music, we sit down and we talk to the community members. We try and get the business owners, to sit down with us and come up with a solution. This is a very convoluted problem, as you guys can imagine. And really, the officers sometimes are put in a no-win situation that, the citizens want the music turned down, but yet it doesn't rise to that level. So, we're always open to suggestions and potential solutions. But the reality is that, unfortunately, you guys are probably going to continue to get loud music complaints, and we're still going to try and address them the best way we can. So I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions.
Councilmember Beck.
All right, I'm up. I hope y'all are comfortable up there. So I think my first one actually is my first round of questions are for Melinda. Hopefully it's not too much noise, it's just sound. My first question is when you talk about that distinction, sound is energy and it creates vibration and we can feel that. So how or can we distinguish noise that maybe does not reach the decibel level that is the loudness, right? Because decibel level is really how loud it is. What about that? Like a low level that would create a vibration that there would be a physical impact on a person or property.
Right, you're right. Right now, the way our maximum decibel levels are written, people who are bothered by low frequency sounds, it's not going, they generally only hit like 40 decibel levels, 50 decibel levels. So that's well below what we have in our residential areas. And that we can look at what best practices are for other cities with regards to how to best measure and capture what low-level sounds are, what low-frequency sounds are, and how to best be able to include them in an ordinance where we can, the police, or depending on where the source of the noise is, maybe code, would be able to cite and have that person who is the originator be able to, if it's machinery, fix it. There's a certain level where typically that was the complaint during the years where gas drilling was going on. It was the low hum that you would hear from compressors. There's ways to build sound walls or other things to mitigate, either through requiring soundproofing for buildings or other measures that we can look at that wouldn't solely be included in a noise ordinance, but perhaps touch on some of our other ordinances as well, that we could look at.
Okay, thank you. And I'm thinking about, I'm a loud music person in my car, so that doesn't bother me, but there are times that you feel people's music.
The bass.
It's painful. But we also deal with that with residents that, in their homes, if they're adjacent to, a bar or
The bass, yes,
entertainment,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
so they feel that, and that's, to me, feels more disruptive than just loud, right? When I'm physically feeling it. So if we could.
Yeah, we can certainly look into
Okay.
that, yes.
All right, great. So first question down. All right, next one is, so just to be clear, it's presumed unreasonable if it exceeds 85.
So for disorderly conduct under the penal code.
Okay. And Chief, do you know if we issue any citations for disorderly conduct as it relates to this, as it relates to noise?
I'd have to go look up the reports again.
Okay, thank you. I didn't ask that earlier. So, okay, next. So I'm a little frustrated actually to learn today that we have this alternative means in our code for issuing citations, because I know we've talked about noise several times at council and noise readers and all of that to really help us understand how to best serve our constituents. And often what we hear is, well, I don't have not everybody has a meter, which we understand. But how often do we issue a citation under this particular code?
So again, I would have to go back and look at the reports. And back in 2021, we did an audit of all the decibel meters in every division, and we learned that there was some deficiencies in each one of the divisions, and so we bought new decibel meters for each division.
Yeah, you'd given us an IR on that.
I did.
a while. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember that. Okay, great. And so I asked about, okay, so my next question is, how often or ever do we train officers on what that sound in practicality feels like, or so that they can be better armed with going to a noise call and understanding where that is? And I know we have the chart, and I appreciate that chart, but standing in a room and hearing 85 decibels, right, is probably a little bit, lets you have a better understanding.
So the majority of the officers, whenever they're in field training, of course, they take a variety of calls. Do I put them in a room and play 85 decibels for them? No.
Okay.
But can I?
Yeah.
Sure, if I wanted to go deaf. But the likelihood of them encountering a loud music call is quite likely. I mean, it's one of the highest things, one of the most frequent calls that we get. So in their training, of course, they have field training officers that deal with this all the time. And you guys know as well as anybody, you guys have frequent flyers in your divisions. People that violate this ordinance time and time and time again. Well, the officers are just as familiar with them. And so anybody that's in training, I guarantee you they're getting exposed to that type of call on multiple occasions.
Okay. Melinda, so you said, when Macy asked a question earlier about different places that are permitted for fireworks shows, and we have them all over the city, but they're not exempt from our noise ordinance. And so I'm really kind of confused, because it feels like we're setting them up for failure. Fireworks are loud by nature, and so how can we permit them for a firework display, but then say, but you're not exempt from a noise complaint?
So a lot of that is really for, through officer discretion, kind of if you have one person complaining about a fireworks display and nobody else in the area is complaining about the fireworks display, that is going to play into whether an officer decides to write the operator of the fireworks, or let's say who's hosting the fireworks, a citation or not. What I will offer is the fire department is coming forward with some amendments to their fireworks display section, where they do address fireworks displays and whether the sound coming from the fireworks display, if it's above ambient, or that it has to meet ambient for that area. So they are trying to address the issue that you are raising related to permitting a fireworks display, because they're the department that permits these fireworks displays, and then kind of the level of the fireworks. Fireworks by their nature are going to be loud. A lot of what you hear does depend on what I mentioned before. It depends on what the atmosphere is for that day, whether the time of day that it's occurring, whether there's any wind. It just depends on how that sound carries on either dampening the sound of the fireworks, or if it's a perfectly clear night and there's nothing, it's still, that fireworks may sound louder than it normally does. It really is dependent upon the atmospheric conditions on that night that those fireworks are occurring. But they do have language in their proposed ordinance that would address your question.
Okay. All right, thank you. And then, Melinda, it's just a statement, really. When I look at the slide 8 that has the different decibel levels day and night by zone, mixed use is often residential. And downtown, future Panther Island and West 7th are also residential areas. And so I get for ease, we've done it by code, right, by zone, but mixed use has residential in it. And so I'm a little concerned about that distinction in there because practically speaking on the ground, when someone does mixed use, it has a residential component to it. And so I think we're not doing right by those residents by allowing that higher level. And I think that's probably why the majority of the complaints that I get come from some of those areas. And then my next question is, we talked about buffering. And so just to play on that, and let me back up and say the reason why I asked for the buffer and all of that is because I have some areas where I get regular complaints from homeowners that live in a single-family neighborhood that have businesses adjacent to them, and those businesses play loud music. And so my question is it, so if we say it's 70 decibels, and so that's 70 decibels in the residential area. So if I'm standing in my driveway, right, and we take that reader, and it's 70 decibels where I am, it's okay. But we're allowing 80 decibels in the zone just adjacent to that property. And so are they in violation if it's 74 in the residential? Does it make sense what I'm trying to ask? Because you've got two separate requirements right next to each other.
Right, so what the officer would do is they would take that measurement from the complainant's property and base it on what that decibel level should be for that complainant's property. So for that person that lives in the residential district that's adjacent, they would be set at, let's say it's 11 o'clock at night, so they would be set at 60 dBA. So they would stand on their property line and they would take their sound meter out and they would measure it. And if it's above 60, they would be able to write a citation based on that to where they believe the originator of the noise is. For the, let's say the person who lives in that mixed use area, if they're the person making the complaint, and more specifically, let's say they're in the West 7th Village, but they're in the apartments that live there, and they're the person making the complaint, the officer would be using what that maximum dBA is for that district, which, you know, at that time would, let's say it's on the weekend, would be 70 dBA.
Right, but
So one way perhaps to look at resolving that is to, instead of measuring from the complainant's property line, is to measure from the property line of where the complaint is originating from. So to go to the business and measure from their property line for the noise that's coming from their property line, and is it exceeding either that maximum decibel level, and whether what we have currently in our ordinance should still be our current maximum decibel levels, I think is something that can be looked at. These were set based on a citywide noise study that was done around 2006. So it's been some time since that's happened, but certainly we can go back as staff and reevaluate whether our maximum decibel levels for all of our districts are where they should be. And more specifically, for some of these entertainment areas, whether we need different regulations for the businesses that operate or within those districts.
yeah, the conundrum I think we fall into is if I'm a resident and it's over 70 decibels where I'm standing, I want you to issue a citation for the person who's making that noise. If I'm the business, right? And you're standing at my property line and it's 80, and I'm saying, well, I'm complying with city code, and why am I getting a citation for compliance? And that's where those setbacks come in and the buffers. And we don't always, I don't know that those are always effective at creating that downgrade in decibels. And so I think it can potentially raise issues. So I don't know how we fix that, but you're pretty smart cookie. So if we could maybe come up with some ways to better address that. Okay. And then Chief, do we have, oh, sorry, Melinda, one more question for you on setbacks. Sorry. With the setbacks, so setbacks and buffer yards, are the buffer yards within that setback? So you have a 20-foot setback, and then is that 5-foot buffer within that 20-foot setback, or is it in addition to?
No, it's my understanding that it's within, and it's specifically, that's the area that has the landscaping or the shrubbery.
Okay, okay, thank you. Okay, Chief. So I see here that it says it's punishable by a fine not to exceed $500. Do we have any mechanisms for habitual offenders?
No.
Okay. Can we look at changing that ordinance for those habitual offenders? Because $500, right, if they're continued, do we have habitual offenders?
Yeah, we can look at that.
Okay. Thank you. And then I think I only have a couple more. Okay, you said that some calls require a witness.
Yes.
What type of calls would require a witness?
So if it doesn't meet the decibel limit, so if it doesn't meet the 60 or 70 decibel minute level, for us to write a ticket, I mean, the person's actually in compliance, but yet the person that is complaining still may feel like it's unreasonable.
Okay.
So in those circumstances, we'd like to have witnesses, because if not, you just have an officer going to court with the complainant or the person that got the citation going, prove that it was unreasonable.
Okay.
So, usually the person that really wants the citation issued, they do a really good job. Sometimes they record the noise. They have other neighbors that'll show up to court. It's just easier to prosecute.
Okay. And then I appreciate the research that you did. Can you tell me a little bit more about this positive interaction program? And
So the department that did it, all they did was they created a group of people that goes out into the community. Let's say it's a bar that's next to a residential area, and they have a conversation, and they try and develop solutions where everybody can live, together without having issues. It is absolutely no different than what we do with our MPOs. So whenever we have the neighborhood association meetings, we invite, either businesses that may have issues or maybe the citizens have concerns with, and sit down and come up with a solution.
okay. And then it's my last question. So when you were looking at the cities that revoke permits, did they give you an idea for like what type of situation would require that?
It
or would
was
allow that?
multiple offenses.
Okay.
So it wasn't just the first time they violated their ordinance. And, their permits were interwoven with, applying for the city. So right now, we stand independent. I mean, you don't have what ifs. If you do this, your permit's going to be revoked. It's you get a permit or you don't.
Okay. Melinda, what would that look like, revoking permits for habitual? I'd like us to look at evaluating what a habitual offender program would look like or what potential parts of our ordinances, what ordinances and what parts of them we would change to maybe deter some of our worst actors.
So if we amended our noise ordinance where we created a program where certain types of businesses needed to get a permit related to noise, and as the chief said, if they violated that permit we'd have to pick however many violations, we would, prior to revoking the permit, we'd have to, of course, give everybody their due process. So we would likely have an appeal process by which they could appeal and then kind of make their case for the appeal. And then if they weren't successful, then we would revoke the permit. Some cities revoke it for a year. Some cities revoke it for less time, but there's always a time period by which that permit's revoked for a certain amount of time.
Yeah. Okay,
or until a plan is, they create a plan to come into compliance and they adhere to it.
perfect. And then I just want to reiterate something that, or my support for something that Councilman Flores brought up, and that's looking into noise management plans for large-scale outdoor activities. I think that would help us manage our constituents when we have those one-time events that maybe create more noise than usual. Sure. Thank you.
I have a couple of comments to add. Councilmember Beck, I've never thought about the idea of mixed use and commercial and how that could be unfair. And so I'm glad you brought that up. And when you think back to 2006, none of us were here then. Certainly it's time for a scrubbing. And I can assure you that there are people in residential areas who will really support taking on habitual offenders. I've got a whole bunch of little old ladies who just live in terror, when it comes to holidays. And so, I'd like to see us take this on to be updated. And the idea that, we could put in some safeguards where maybe we had zoning and didn't have development at the time, but now it's there and it's creating chaos. And so, hats off to all of you who weighed in on this conversation, but I think we're due for an update. That's all. And now, I was looking at David, it's on me. We're going to hear from Assistant City Manager Dana Bergdorf giving us a update on development streamlining. Thank you, Melinda and Chief. I forgot to say thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and members of the City Council. I appreciate the opportunity to provide this update to you. The last time we provided a briefing on development streamlining was last June of 2023, and we thought it would be a good opportunity to run through some of the accomplishments that both Development Services and other coordinating departments have made over the past year. What I'm going to do is go through several slides, and then I'll turn it over to DJ Harrell, the real expert, to walk through a number of the slides after that. So one of the things that I think you all know is that we've been working on development process streamlining for as long as I think I've worked for the city of Fort Worth, right? It's an ongoing task. There's ongoing challenges. We're in the fastest growing large city in the country, so there's a lot of demands. But there's also been a need for a lot of improvements, and so we recognize that. What prompted some of our more regular conversations is the Real Estate Council has been a partner with us in surveying development customers to hear from them what are some of the issues and concerns that they're hearing, as well as the Chamber of Commerce and as well as our own Development Advisory Committee. And so the Real Estate Council provided a list of 10 recommendations last January of 2023 to Mayor and Council. And we've been working through a number of those, as well as recommendations that we've received from the Institute for Justice related to small businesses and business equity, and again, our monthly meetings with our Development Advisory Committee. So what I'd like to touch on is the Real Estate Council and the forums that we've held, and I want to thank David and the city management team, because it's not just, Development Services, it's a lot of different departments that are involved in helping to achieve the excellent customer experience that we want to have, as well as making sure that the improvements that we've made in one department are reflected in other departments as well. And so I want to thank the directors of those other departments, because they've been very willing to jump on board and be part of training and be part of these improvements. So just a quick review, we've got the updated list of the City Council's strategic priorities, and in looking at this list, we think development really touches on all of these elements: economic development, community safety, infrastructure, responsible growth, and so on, as well as being something that the sooner that we can help a developer or a property owner achieve their goals, the sooner we're able to get property that may be underdeveloped or undeveloped on the tax rolls and be productive for Fort Worth. And so that is part of our financial responsibility, as well as making sure that we're using our staff resources and other resources efficiently. The city manager's work plan, so for a few years, The goals have been related to improving customer service, efficiency, and transparency, and then improving the planning and development review process. So this falls in line with that. And then lastly, we wanted to touch on the city employee values. And so, of course, again, we want to be sure that we're treating our customers with all of these values. And then again, to touch on exceptional customer experience and continuous improvement is two that are really highlighted for us as we bring this to you. So one of the things that the team has done is worked on a Development 101 training that has been very successful. And I stole this slide from that presentation. And the Real Estate Council has thought that it's been pretty important because it helps illustrate the complexity of development, that there's land development, there's infrastructure development, and then there's building development. And there's been a lot of improvements over the years related to building development, related to getting your certificate of occupancy, to getting a building permit in timely. Generally, where folks have been getting caught up is when they maybe don't have the entitlements, they need to plat or replat the property, and there's infrastructure involved. So that could be a greenfield project where they need to extend infrastructure, or that could be a redevelopment where when they come in, they realize they have to upgrade the infrastructure. And so we had circled last June that infrastructure square, if you will, to highlight that as an issue or an area of concern that we were needing to focus on. We still have some staffing challenges in terms of hiring engineers to help us with infrastructure plan review, but there's been a lot of great work to streamline those infrastructure processes. So one of the 10 recommendations was that the city manager hold a biannual, twice-a-year forum with the development community. So we've done that. We held our first one last July. And as you can imagine, we focused on infrastructure. So we had a good conversation about our infrastructure studies, water, sewer, stormwater, traffic, infrastructure plan review center, our agreements for community facility agreements, encroachment agreements, stormwater maintenance agreements, and so on, and then grading permits. And then just this last February, just a couple of months ago, they asked that we focus on these 3 recommendations: employee retention strategies, expanding the positive trajectory that development has made to other development-related departments, and resolving internal process conflicts so that customers aren't doing that themselves. And so, again, had a great discussion and a lot of great support from the city departments involved. So, first thing I want to mention is Deanna Giordano with HR department. She and our city management team agreed that the customer experience, the customer service training, that responsibility for dealing with customer problems when they come in the door, that's something that applies really citywide. And so HR took on that role of putting together a really outstanding customer service training program to make sure that we're talking through not just a 1-hour training, but what they put together, I'll just switch to this next slide, is a 4-week program, 28 hours of blended learning, both instructor-led, self-paced, as well as some peer-to-peer sessions. And you'll see on the right all of the different departments that went through that training. And so again, I want to thank all the departments that agreed to send reps to that training. Over 324 employees that were trained this last summer and fall. And in fact, HR has now incorporated that training into their curriculum for all city employees. So we're very, very excited to see that. And just coming back again here, you know, we want to have that focus on owning problems, being problem solvers, going above and beyond, having that sense of urgency. You got to talk fast like I do. I'm teasing, adhering to deadlines, giving customers options, and trying to have some consistency in every interaction. We, you know, we of course want customers to say, wow. So at this point, I think I turn it over to DJ to take on these next slides, but I did just also want to recognize, he's not here, but Councilmember Michael Crane has been heavily involved in small business development and working with us and with both development services, economic development, our communications and public engagement, and I know I'm missing some other folks, to help develop a lot of different resources. And so I'll turn it over to DJ to describe those. Thank you. Can't get out that way.
Thank you, Dana. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, City Manager Cook. As you know, and as Dana hit it, development is quite complicated. Our department, as well as our partner departments, we spend a lot of time brainstorming how we can better facilitate development in the city of Fort Worth and you know, meet people halfway on the development path. Some of the things that we've done for new business, new small business initiatives, where we've designated people in both Economic Development Department as well as Development Services Department to help facilitate new small businesses through the process as they develop in the city of Fort Worth. We've also, as Dana said, continued the development one-on-one trainings. We've developed several guides, commercial development guides related to, restaurants and other commercial uses in the city of Fort Worth to promulgate those on our website. We've also, redid our website to create other links and tools available for first-time developers as well as other developers. We've created informational videos and other tools that we've also shared as well. Brief update on our volume of this past calendar year, 2023. We had almost 16,000 total permits issued. And if you guys want to compare year over year, that's right above 2019, but right below 2020 in volume. Commercial permits, a little over 2,000 and about 1,600 for new construction, which exceeds the 2020 numbers. 222 commercial lots platted and 51 community facilities agreements executed. We've also made some strides in our software areas. We've engaged with a company called Velocimo that connects a lot of our tools, our technological tools, and help them work together to seamlessly offer the best customer experience. Permit Assist, that's the software that someone can go onto our website and pretty much get their due diligence done in a matter of moments by just typing in what they'd like to do and where the property is located. So that's now connected with our permit, which I think council asked for. It's connected with our permit software so they don't have to log off of that account and then log into a totally new system just to get through the process. We've also made strides in areas where to help with the consultant engineering community to provide comments to their plan sets as they go along. So Bluebeam, eBuilder, for contracts, we've implemented more tools in Adobe Sign, DocuSign, eNotaries. We're also transferring a lot of stuff from Laserfish to our website to be able to provide for folks to get their certificate of occupancies and other documents online at their fingertips. Also, we've rolled in new payment portals for both the Water Department as well as Development Services Department. And we've also launched a new plan deficiency report. So when someone turns into an application to the city of Fort Worth and it's deficient, we wanted to make sure that we standardize our comments to those customers so that, Water Department doesn't have one structure of comments, the Fire Department has another structure of comments, and the Development Services, and so on and so on. So we've standardized the way we communicate with customers to make it easier for them to understand what plans are deficient. Also, we've updated Acela. I think we talked to you guys in March of last year about going into the cloud. So we went into the cloud March of last year, and that's going well. It's also afforded us the ability to be able to quickly put more tools into Acela. For instance, we've added a lot of new stuff for the Fire Department, the Water Department, and even Code Department. We've also streamlined the process for new plat addresses assignments, platting studies, and building permits. Again, we updated our with additional water permit types in Acela, and then we also focused on our 24-hour review time. So basically, projects under 6,000 square feet should be able to walk into City Hall and leave with a permit. Right, but we wanted to try to mimic that process online. So maybe they don't need to come all the way down to City Hall. Maybe we can do that same thing from the comfort of their living room. And so we've been able to accomplish that. It's not as quick as the walk-in where you walk in an hour you leave, but within 24 hours those permits should be issued as well. Let's talk about the Water Department. So the Water Department's made huge strides in their water application section. They've been able to do a couple BPIs on contract meters where they've streamlined the time for receiving meters. I'm sorry? Oh, business process improvements? Yes, ma'am. So basically, they wanted to ensure that they were able to issue meters in a timely fashion. I think the metric is 3 days for commercial and 7 days for residential. So they've made huge strides, since last year working on that. They've enhanced their plan review, comments and notes, as I spoke on earlier. They've had initiatives related to employee retention as well as enhanced training efforts. And they've created dashboards to make sure that they're meeting all their KPIs as they're going along. Also, our city managers, one of his core values that, Dana put on the screen earlier is continuous improvement. In development services, what we've done is created a program by which our employees can receive a green belt in Lean Six Sigma. And during that process, they have to complete a project that either saves time or money for the city of Fort Worth and our citizens and residents. And part of that, with that project, they've created 12 or more projects, including standardizing contractor registration, the contract process, development advisory committee informational reports, TIAs, third-party reviews, encroachment agreement process timing, and pre-development conferences, and reduction of call center inbound calls. Another great stride that they've made is they created a system by which we talked about people being able to apply for permits from the comfort of their home. They can also now get consultations from the comfort of their home. So we have a system called QList where they can log in, set a time, and meet with any city person from the comfort of their home on a WebEx meeting, doing that same process as if they were a walk-in. So if they wanted to apply and they just needed some help, they had some questions on how to facilitate that, we would have a customer service rep or even an engineer pop on in order to help facilitate that application process. Other things that we're doing, we're working with Carlo Capia and Kevin Gunn in our IT department to utilize AI for intake. So we're working with TCU. We're also looking at a couple other consultants to see how we can proceed with that as well. Other improvements that we've made, we're constantly trying to keep our ear to the rail. So we've rolled out some new surveys related to our customer service in the call center. We're also undertaking we're on the tail end of a structure and efficiency study that is being conducted by Barry Dunn. It should be completed next month. It'll let us know a couple of things. One, if everybody in our organization is classified appropriately, but also how efficient are we set up as a department in our hierarchy. Also, we've been laser focused on our efforts to hire those hard to fill positions, those engineers, those planners, those inspectors. So we've been putting a lot of efforts into going to job fairs and going to conferences in order to recruit those individuals. And with a high vacancy rate or high turnover rate, another thing that's really important is training. So we've been focusing a lot on onboarding manuals, rolling out 30, 60, 90-day plans for new employees and trying to keep in some of that institutional knowledge so that we can share with folks as they come into the door. Some really good news is a lot of you will remember 2019, the state legislator decided that our engineering plans should go to the City Planning Commission for review. What that did was that slowed down our entire development process. Back in 2017, we had conducted a Lean Six Sigma where we reduced the time for developer-led infrastructure delivery from 252 days to 105 days. Well, the very next year, the legislator added a shot clock bill, which was intended to speed up development. It essentially had the effect of slowing it down because now development had to wait to go to a city plan commission once or twice a month. So now, in the last legislative session, Bill 3699 took those plans out of the shot clock bill, and now we're allowed to go back to our legacy process, which started actually today, where now we're able to accept engineering plans every week rather than once a month. And so that's going to speed up those engineering plans as well. And we also made a couple other changes where we no longer require all studies to be completed before you can enter into that process. Other efforts to reduce time and streamline development were related to ordinance changes. We looked at our encroachment ordinance and some of our zoning ordinance to try to come up with some of those normal conflicts that take up a whole lot of time on the development side that we think can be done in an administrative manner. And so we made some text amendments there. Another program that we're starting today, as a matter of fact, is our SIP program. It's called the SIP program. It stands for Small Scale Infrastructure Program. And it's designed to deliver that same infrastructure by city means. For example, if we have a small business in the near south side that wants to open, and we tell them that they have to build 2 street lights and 3 pedestrian scale lights. Well, you know, it's much more difficult for Dale's Donuts to go and do that than it is for the city of Fort Worth to cause that construction to happen. Yeah. So we've just started this process today. It rolled out today, but it's meant to be a turnkey solution to help those developments move forward without having to go through the CFA process. Here's the phasing of it. So we're at phase 0 today, right? Where we're just starting out. We're going to start light. So we're starting with, you know, pavement. We're starting with the pedestrian scale lighting and the street lights. And then we're going to see how it goes to October. And in October, we're looking to roll out our software. The software we're looking to use is eBuilder. It's a software that our Transportation Public Works Department uses, and they're currently doing some work for them through IT. And so the next phase will be scaling all infrastructure categories. So in the water department, we have something similar, which is called the in-house design. So we're looking to phase the developer portion of that in-house design back to development services department. And so with that, we'll also be doing stormwater, we'll be doing water, sewer, we'll be doing streetlight, sidewalks, and flat work. So we'll be able to do any smaller projects that are smaller in nature, but we'll be able to do any infrastructure category. And then lastly, our last goal in 2026, we want to roll out to in-house design. The program is designed today to utilize third-party engineering consultants to help us design this infrastructure, and we'll pass that cost along to the applicant. But eventually, what we want to do is do all that in-house because we know it'll be faster. We won't have to do a whole lot of QA, QC to make sure that the plans get out in a timely fashion. So next steps, we're going to continue to work on integrations with Acela, work on our technological improvements. We're also, keeping our ears to the rail with the Real Estate Council, with our DAC, our small business partners to ensure that we're reacting to their concerns as they may come up. And then we're also looking to continue to upgrade our queue list. We know we're going to be moving into a new building. We want to make sure everything is effortless and it works better than it does today. That is the end of the presentation. Here for any questions.
DJ, I am convinced everybody does work for DJ. Yeah, I'm just, it's really impressive to see how we're able to do cross-training and not move everyone up under you. I didn't think that could happen. And so, David, my hat goes off to you here with that. I do have my peers who have their hands up. I saw Councilmember Hill first, then Charlie, then Carlos. Nobody on this side so far.
Thank you for the update, DJ. A quick question on the new program. What size companies would qualify for the small scale, or how would you define that?
So it's not by the size of company, but it's about the size of project. So it's about 800 linear foot of water sewer lines, right? 800 linear foot of storm lines, and then there's 5 maximum street lights, 8 maximum pedestrian scale lights. But I can also share that information as well. We just rolled it out on our website, so what I can do is I can share a link to all of it. Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Flores.
Oh, that was Charlie.
Charlie.
So, thank you. So amazing update. Really looking forward to hearing from some of the developers too, who are going to be benefiting from some of these changes. I want to make sure we're continuing to empower our employees at every level to make those common sense, I guess, decisions. Recently, I talked to a new business owner in District 4 who opened up his third Nothing But Cakes. And unfortunately, during the process, it was kind of a unique situation, and Development Services wasn't sure how to categorize where he was, so they just made it fast food drive-through, even though it was neither of which. And so he tried arguing, but it ended up costing him like 40 grand, and he knew that that'd get refunded once it was determined he wasn't fast food drive-through, but he paid it because he was up against deadlines. He did get that refund, so I'm glad Development Services was able to work for him. But I think had that employee at that lower level had that empowerment, say, no, I know what the book says, but that's not what this is. It's a bakery. Here's what we're going to categorize it. I think that would have streamlined and saved a lot of time and money. So I just want to make sure we're empowering employees at all levels. And the two, I really like the small scale program, but are you also looking at large scale improvements, like for example, the X team? I think it's great for those who can afford it, but going beyond that for the large scale projects for vetted, proven developers who they live in Fort Worth, they work in Fort Worth, they do large scale projects that if it's delayed by 3 months, it's costing the city of Fort Worth in tax revenue potentially millions of dollars, which then could go to fund some of these other programs. Have y'all looked at or considered any programs for those large developments, like almost like a red carpet, and like helping them, not cutting corners, but pushing them through faster, so that way they can hit the ground running and start generating that revenue? Have y'all looked at that at all?
Yes, sir, absolutely. So, pretty much all of our focus traditionally has been on those large-scale, projects, right? Probably in the last 2 years, there's been a shift to kind of help facilitate small business as well. But, for instance, the slide that I'll go back to, this process, infrastructure plan review process, we have what's called an express CFA. And it's basically intended to help those large projects, go through the system a bunch quicker. Also, the Lean Six Sigma project that I mentioned that we work with DAC and Real Estate Council on was basically geared to those larger projects. And we didn't give a lot of thought to small businesses. And so when you see some of that newer stuff talking about small businesses, it's basically to try to catch them up, because we know that they're also the economic engine of our community. But also, the last thing is, we also have a program called Project Facilitation, where these facilitators are assigned to these projects as they come into the city. Traditionally, again, they've been traditionally assigned to those larger projects of higher economic value. Now we're starting to, look at that program and increase it to small business, also increase it to, affordable housing and things like that. So we're looking across the gambit now of this concierge service, if you will, to help, bring development into the city of Fort Worth. Yes, sir.
DJ, thanks for looking into process improvements by investing in our people. I think it's great that you're giving them the opportunity to get training and certification through Lean Sigma, training. My question is, how do I get in on that?
Yeah.
We'll get you signed up.
I'm ready.
Show me some black belts and then I'll be real impressed. Any other questions, comments? Jared?
Just one quick one. In preparation for the budget season, is there anything you would like us to know that would help improve what you're doing?
Well, I think, now is the time that we're starting to kind of look at our strategic plan and, develop our business plan and kind of roll out what those needs are. We're looking at volumes, right? Obviously, we're looking at also, what the council priorities are, what the David Cook's work plan is as well, to try to see how we can accomplish it. So I expect in the coming month or so, we'll have a better view on what we would need to be able to accomplish that. Yes, sir.
This is a real diplomatic response. I have yet to hear a department head say, I need X number of dollars. Thank you, DG. Yeah. I have yet to hear that. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you, sir. Next to last presentation deals with congregate living. And we'll hear from LaShondra Stringfellow, Melinda Ramos again, and Chief Aldridge again. Congregate living. Okay, gotcha. Sounds like hippies to me. Okay, wait here, they say.
All right, good afternoon again. So I'm going to get this presentation started, and then Melinda and Chief Aldridge will be taking over from me. So I'm going to be talking about the zoning portion of it and how we classify some of these different congregate living categories. So we're going to talk about the different types of congregate living, the applicable laws, how we're classifying those in our zoning. And Melinda's going to talk more about reasonable accommodation because really that's the wild card. That's the exception to everything that I'm going to be telling you. And then Chief Aldridge is going to talk about the boarding home ordinance and enforcement. So what is it that we mean by congregate living? So we're talking about types of housings in which individuals or a family has a private bedroom or living quarters, but they're shared with other residents with a common dining room, recreational room, or other facilities. So there are two categories that we're looking at here. So the first category are for elderly and persons with disabilities. And now this can also include, we're going to get into some nuances here. This can include folks who need supervision versus those who do not. Then we have the unrelated persons, and those are your lodging houses, religious institutions with monasteries and convents, and then, of course, student housing. So there are three different laws that we have to think about here. Obviously, the city is going to be enforcing our zoning ordinance and reasonable accommodation. However, as a city, we also have to be cognizant of the state laws and then federal laws that also govern housing, which also impact reasonable accommodation that Melinda is going to be talking about. So first of all, let's talk about what's allowed in single-family districts. So obviously a family, that's the easy one. But when we say a family, you know, we're not just talking about those who are related. Our ordinance has a specific definition where it talks about a single housekeeping unit for 5 unrelated individuals. Now, you may remember you also passed an ordinance that we refer to as the TCU overlay, where it's actually restricted to 3 unrelated individuals. And one of the things that we look at when we talk about a single housekeeping unit, we're not looking at individual leases. Whenever we get a complaint, we will actually look for a lease, and on that lease, we're looking for all those individuals being listed on one lease, and them basically living as a one common family, I guess maybe communal type living. And then the next group that is allowed, but it's going to be limited to 6 occupants, and that's a boarding home facility. Now, a boarding home facility is different from a group home that we're going to look at next, and that with a boarding home facility, these individuals may have some disabilities. However, they do not require supervision. So that is an important nuance. But again, it's limited to 6 unless they have a reasonable accommodation. And then next is what we call a community home. These are actually a little bit easier for us in zoning to spot. Reason being is because they are actually required to have a license by the state. So that's an easy one. If you got a license by the state, you have no more than 6 plus 2 supervisors living there, you can be considered a community home. Now, these are the different types of congregate living institutions that are not permitted in single-family districts. But again, there is always that nuance of reasonable accommodation. So the easy one are fraternity or sorority houses. Now, group homes, group home 1, this is going to be a maximum of 15 residents. Those are not going to be allowed in single-family. However, you have those instances where, and we kind of look up to 9 persons for reasonable accommodations because maybe there is a good reason to allow one in a single family home. However, we want to make sure that it does not rise to the level of now being a facility, right? Because the whole point is that it can fit into a single family district setting. Halfway houses, not permitted in any circumstance, as well as shelters. So there's some other notable residential uses that I would like to point out here as well before Melinda gets up to talk a little bit more about reasonable accommodation. Accessory dwelling units, those are allowed, but however, there is a nuance here as well. They cannot be rented. So it has to be, for example, a mother-in-law quarters. But if it's rented or used as a separate resident, then it's not allowed in a single-family district. And then these other items, again, prohibited. I just told you about ADUs that are rented. Bed and breakfast, homes and inns, those are also prohibited, as well as short-term home rentals.
So now we're going to talk about reasonable accommodations. And the reasonable accommodation ordinance was adopted in March of 2016, and it was part of a settlement agreement that we entered into with the United States, the Department of Justice, for a fair housing complaint that we received related to a sober house, or sober home. And if you're not familiar with those, that term refers to folks that are either have alcohol or drug addictions and that are in recovery. And they've been at a place to receive treatment, and this is where they're going to be reintroduced to a community setting and to be reintegrated into their communities. I'm not sure any of the council, how many of the council was actually on the council at the time that we were going through it, perhaps just the Mayor Pro Tem and Carlos. Yeah, so you may have been on the zoning commission perhaps. So, but just to go into that lawsuit a little bit more, the city was under, as part of our settlement agreement, those departments that dealt with development, the Development Services Department, the Code Compliance Department, some aspects of the Police Department, all had to go through reasonable accommodation training that both on our ordinance that Dana and I gave, and both that we had a consultant come in and give related to the Fair Housing Act and Americans with Disabilities Act. But what the ordinance does that we adopted, and just as a caveat, our ordinance also had to be blessed by the DOJ. So this is the one ordinance that we definitely know is constitutional. But what the ordinance does, it provides regulations and procedures to comply with the FHA and the ADA. It sets out an administrative process to consider requests for accommodations to land use, to building regulations, and to other practices and policies or procedures of our city code, or how the city functions. It's an administrative process, so public hearings are not part of that process. Neighbor notification is not part of that process. It establishes the criteria that is used to consider when we consider these requests to the benefit of the persons with disabilities. Those criteria are kind of written in the form of questions. So whether or not the housing will be used by a person with disabilities, that's protected under the federal laws. Whether the reasonable accommodation is necessary to make that dwelling available to a person with disabilities. Whether the accommodation would pose an undue financial or administrative burden on the city, and that's determined by a case-by-case basis. And then lastly, whether the reasonable accommodation would require a fundamental alteration in the nature of the city's program or law. It also provides criteria by which the city has to make decisions. The city can either grant an accommodation or it can modify the accommodation in certain aspects. It also provides an appeal process if the city does deny an accommodation, or if we grant an accommodation that the person seeking the reasonable accommodation doesn't agree with. So kind of what does that reasonable accommodation do? So it may allow, like what we got sued for, it may allow a sober home or a group home with more than 5 persons to operate as a single family in a residential zone. It could waive a minimum yard requirement. It could allow the construction of a pool in a required side yard or rear setback. It could allow a front yard carport without going to the Board of Adjustments for a special exception. As a modification to a building, it could allow the construction of a ramp. Or mostly these affect land use, so zoning type related, but it can include other policies. So it could allow for a service animal where they may already have the maximum number of dogs that our code allows. So it can have that effect as well. So I'll just talk briefly about the boarding home facility ordinance, and I'll turn it over to the chief to talk about the enforcement. So the city adopted the boarding home facility ordinance on January 10th of 2023, and it was effective on April 15th of 2023. It regulates facilities that provide lodging to 3 or more elderly or disabled persons who are unrelated by blood or marriage. And it provides care services, including meals, transportation, laundry, and medication. And the Health and Safety Code, once you adopt this ordinance, it allows these particular facilities to be in all residential districts. These are facilities that are not licensed by the state, and so a law was passed in 2013 by the state legislature or 2011, that allowed cities to adopt this type of ordinances. A lot of our cities, Houston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, have these type of ordinances, and we finally looked at adopting and did adopt this in 2023. So I'll turn it over to the chief now to talk about enforcement.
Mayor Pro Tem Council, good to be back with you. So whenever we started this about a year ago, we didn't know what we didn't know. So there were a lot of things that logistically that were gaps that we kind of had to fill in. And so we're probably not as far as we want to be, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. So we have an officer that's assigned with our crisis intervention team, along with the code compliance specialist, that are basically connected at the hip whenever they deal with a boarding home. Right now, a lot of it is complaint-based, because if you remember from the previous presentation, last year, most of these houses look like a regular home. You don't know that they're a boarding home unless you see people coming in and out more so than what you normally have. So, they do a lot of outreach and education, some compliance assistance, they do inspections, they can issue citations, and, compliance and safe housing are their ultimate goals. So just to show what they have done, they visited over 450 addresses. They've closed 270 suspected boarding homes. They've identified 74 bona fide boarding homes. 12 of the 74 are in various stages of permitting. 25 of the homes have shut down or moved to another city. No one has been displaced because of this. We've been able to find other accommodations for people for those homes that have been closed. Just of a side notes, we've assisted the Attorney General in 4 Medicaid fraud cases, food stamp violations. We've worked with Tarrant County MHMR and JPS for placement. The officers still are providing food for some of these locations where the refrigerators and cabinets are locked and these individuals don't have access to foods. And they've worked with some of the utility companies to get the gas and electricities turned back on some of the houses that were not. So these officers are working really, really hard, trying to make sure that this population is not lacking for either food or just the basic necessities to survive. So with that, I wanted to show you, these are the first 3 individuals that have been permitted and are actually officially considered boarding homes by our ordinance. So that's a win. We're moving in the right direction. So with that, we will take questions.
I don't have any questions for you, Chief, but I do want to say, when it comes to picking the right person for the job, I really applaud PD putting Officer King in that position, because he definitely seems to have a passion for it.
He absolutely
and,
does.
He likes to share some of those wins, and I think that list really shows why we needed this ordinance. And so I truly do appreciate all of the work that both him and Code have put into making sure that we're getting some enforcement. I know it was rocky.
It was.
There was a little rocky start at the beginning, but I think our residents of Fort Worth are greatly benefiting from that.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Okay, so a lot of I think most of my questions are development and Melinda related. If you could go back to slide number 4. And so it would have been helpful if we had had this, but what I'm interested in is, as we go through these different types, right, like assisted living center, the city or state regulates that. So if we could just go down the list and you could let us know who gets to choose where they go, and who regulates them, so that when we get phone calls from our constituents, or just to better educate our constituents, so like assisted living, is that us or the state?
So that's the state.
Okay, boarding homes are us,
So that's us.
community homes,
That is the state.
okay.
But there's a state statute that says that they are allowed in residential districts.
Okay, so we can't control if they go into a single family.
That's correct.
And then before we get to, or let's just go down the rest of the list, group homes,
So those are, most of group homes have to get registered with the state. Through zoning, we don't allow group homes in 1 and 2 family. I believe they're only allowed in multifamily and above.
and is there any restriction on the proximity of any of these to each other, so that we don't over proliferate in a certain area?
For group homes, there is not. For community homes, in the statute and in our, well, I'm sorry, let me step back. For community homes, in the statute and in our ordinance is 500 foot.
From each other?
Yes.
Okay.
For group homes, I believe the same is to be true. And in the boarding home facility, we have a development standard for them to be 500 feet from each other.
Okay, and then nursing homes is,
Nursing homes, residential care homes, and state-supported living centers are all regulated by the state.
okay, and then all the unrelated folks, that's all us, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, can you explain to me the difference between a community home and a group home? Because when I read the definitions, they sound similar, so I don't understand the distinction.
So they are very similar. The best distinction that I can tell you is there are 2 different state agencies that regulate them.
Okay.
And that's kind of really all I have for you there.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. So, so if I get a phone call or if someone's concerned, one, I guess, how would we ascertain if it's a group home or a community home? That's,
So there are databases that I know our code compliance department searches and development services, and we'll search to look to see if these, usually they're businesses that run these, that if they're registered with the state is where we'll go to look for them. We can provide those to you all if you want to have those, what those links are, where we go to look.
I think that would be helpful. And then, so you said it's just a difference, so if they have a complaint with one of those, the best place to go would be that agency that is
Yeah, it's
regulating it?
typically it's the, I'm going to get their name wrong. It's the Texas Aging,
Agency on Aging?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that. And then you answered that question. For the TCU overlay, we know how the boarding home facility is enforced, and that's a little different. PD can go in there because of the way that we did that ordinance. But how do we enforce these 5 unrelated or the TCU overlay?
So for the TCU overlay, of course, it's the 1 mile surrounding the campus. And so within that overlay for single-family districts, unrelated persons are limited to 3 persons. So when we adopted that ordinance at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015, folks who were operating at 5 unrelated persons had an opportunity to register and go on a list. And so long as they maintain on that list, then when code gets a complaint, code does their investigation, they go out to the property, they'll try to speak to the residents, contact the property owner, and try to determine, are there 3 persons living there? Are there 4 or 5 persons? Are they part of this list that we required people to come register on? If they're not, then they kind of proceed with their investigation. I'm not sure if Shannon is here and wants to address how they go about investigating when we get complaints of unrelated persons, just generally and specifically within the overlay.
Okay, and I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I know when we get calls to District 9, there's often a lot of frustration because, and it really seems to be in the investigatory process about, whether or not those people are living there, whether or not they're registered. And so can you walk us through that so we have a better idea?
Yes, so it's very similar to what we're doing for boarding homes, where we have one officer that's specifically doing boarding homes. On everything else, whether it's a family, 5 unrelated, or whether it's TCU overlay and determining that there's only 3 unrelated, It is just our neighborhood code officer that goes out there to determine that. And so they're knocking on doors, they're contacting the owner, they're talking to neighbors. We have the same difficulties that if people don't open the doors. So it all comes down to doing the research and now at least on the TCU overlay, the ordinance does allow us to request a lease from the owner to determine how many people are there. So that's a little bit easier.
But it's up to them to provide us with all the lease documentation.
Right.
Right.
But if they don't, we do have an option to issue a citation based on that.
Okay. And then what happens if you issue continually issue a citation? Is there anything, again, for those habitual offenders or?
So we haven't had to yet, but we could go to district court.
Okay. All right. I think those are all of my questions. Thank you.
Any others? Moving right along. The final presentation will come to us from Reginald Zeno, and he will give us a 2024 debt financing plan presentation. He'll be joined by John Samford. Mr. Zeno.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm not Mr. Zeno, but
Okay.
maybe I'll
I looked up and I
suffice.
was surprised.
All right. And I appreciate that y'all left the most exciting topic for last. I appreciate it. All right, again, my name's John Sanford. I'm the city's treasurer, here today to present to you the 2024 debt financing plan. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but make it as informative as you need, and we'll open up questions at the end. So here's a quick summary of the 2024 financing plan. You can see we're planning to issue about $178 million in general obligation debt. This includes $161 million, which is the second series of the 2022 bond authorization. So as y'all know, we issue the $560 million over a series of years as the money is needed. So this is the next series in that. $17 million in tax notes. These are short-term, 7-year notes. We use these for fire apparatus replacements, about $13.3 million. And then that leaves just under $4 million, about 3.7 for other needs, which will be figured out working with administration and Forward Lab. On the water and sewer, we have about $244 million. That includes $185 million in water and sewer revenue bonds, and then about $60 million roughly in a Texas Water Development Board subsidized loan for infrastructure. And then lastly, $18.5 million. These are special assessment revenue bonds for the Walsh Ranch PID. These are paid from special assessment. We're issuing these on behalf of the PID, and the debt is paid for through the assessments on the properties within that Walsh Ranch PID. So, any questions before I move on? Okay, here's just another look at the 2022 bond authorization. Previously, we've issued about 86 million, so this is the 161 I just mentioned. Keep in mind, we may adjust those. We show none for open space. Money has been spent out of the program for open space. We may toggle these a little bit, but the amount would not exceed 161 million. Okay, a defeasance or early retirement update here. You may recall at the last council meeting, you approved a agenda item to early retire series of the 2012 CO and 2013 general obligation bonds to achieve about $340,000 in net present value savings. That takes into consideration time value of money and other costs to execute this transaction. So it's a positive saving. So we support moving forward with this transaction. A little bit about our debt capacity on the general obligation side here. So this is all based on a model that which takes into consideration a number of variables. You can see our assumptions that we use in the model. For example, the tax rate, we're assuming it's going to be kept flat at 14.75, 4% growth on the property tax revenue side, the value, which is consistent with how Forward Lab models future forecasts. A little bit for delinquent penalties and interest, and then assumes the self-supporting debt, for example, CCPD related debt, culture and tourism, solid waste, et cetera, that those revenues will be available to pay those debts. And all of that basically boils down to about 1.6 billion roughly in bonding capacity through 2030. That's broken down as follows: 474 million, that's the remaining 2022 bond authorization, of which we're issuing 161. 122 million for the tax note program through this period of time. 120 million for reserve capacity. Now we recommend keeping reserve for emergencies. You know, if there's a grant that needs matching funds, things like that. So it's a good idea to keep some in reserve. And then all that equals out to roughly 800 million that would be available for a 2026 bond authorization. And that's 43% increase over 2022, so quite a increase, which with all the infrastructure needs, that's a good thing. There's just a graphical view of what we just talked about. You can see we maximize this issuance plan in 2030-31. You can see we get close to our revenue line up there, but we keep everything in check so that we maintain a good financial management of debt. For a quick market update, there is the municipal bond rates and the treasury bond yield rates. You can see that since we last presented our debt plan last year, rates peaked in October. They've since come back down. We're basically in the ballpark of last year, so that's a good thing. And I'm sure, as everybody's heard, the Fed is exercising patience. Inflation is still running a little bit higher than their 2% target, so that's kind of where we're at right now. Just a kind of a quick look at future debt activities here. There are a number of big projects coming down the line, such as Marys Creek Water Treatment Plant, and the normal water and sewer infrastructure improvements. We've got an exciting convention center expansion in the works, and then the A&M campus expansion there. So those are some major items coming down the line. Just a little bit about the city's credit rating. As you're aware, we maintain ratings from all the major credit rating agencies, and they all basically, even though they use different methodologies in how they look at our credit, they all basically place us in high investment grade. And that's primarily because of the strong economy, economic growth here, outstanding financial performance, strong in increasing reserves, and strong management practices. A little bit of a challenge on the leverage side with fixed cost and leverage primarily due to the unfunded pension liability. This is a quantitative view from Moody's. This is their scorecard. So basically, we run our numbers through the scorecard to give us a feel for where we think we're going to rate out. The scorecard comes out to AA3. That's basically where we're at currently. Keeps us in the high investment grade category. Again, you can see for the most part, we score pretty well in the categories of economy, financial performance, and institutional framework. And then again, a little bit of a challenge there in the leverage category. To close out, I just wanted to summarize the next steps here to execute the debt financing plan. We'll be coming forward with the bond authorization ordinances on April 23rd. The cash defeasance transaction we discussed will close out on April 24th. We'll be meeting with credit rating agencies on April 29th, with bond sales scheduled to happen May 21st, with delivery funds about a month later. And then I need to point out a typo here. The Walsh Ranch bonds would not be going to council on the 17th because that's a Friday. It'd be May 21st.
Okay.
So everybody's still awake. Any questions?
Any questions? I guess you were just that good. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Future agenda items from council members. I'll start with council member at the end. I'm just dead. Jeanette, any future agenda items? Alan? Chris? We'll come back to you. Elizabeth? Carlos?
we already said it, request that staff look into requiring a noise management plan for any outdoor event of a certain size, including Panther Island.
Chris?
Yep, just want to, I know we talked about it in the Homeless Coalition meeting and today, but I want to get a full report on the bond for the affordable housing. Also, when I was looking into the Race and Culture Task Force recommendation, I want to actually have a report on that recommendation, but I want to focus on all the other items. I know the last time we focused on just the criminal, talking about the oversight monitor office, but we talked about affordable housing, we talked about equity and quality. I actually want that full report to come back to us as a recommendation, because I think that might also encourage us when it comes to the affordability. So I want to bring that report back. I did talk to one of the co-chairs offline and mentioned it already.
I love hearing about zoning and equity. Charlie?
Yeah, just one, from legal and code, either an update or a report on vacant businesses and potential liens for not staying within compliance for illegal dumping and taking care of it in a timely fashion.
Can you elaborate?
Yeah, so we have quite a few vacant businesses that are constant nuisance issues with not taking care of illegal dumping. And it's reported time and time again, and then it takes forever to clean up. And I understand it's a gift of service if the city goes out there and cleans it up, but these are large businesses and somebody has some pockets. And if we're gonna go after our residential folks to stay in compliance, then I wanna make sure these large business owners who are probably out of the state, they out of sight, out of mind, whether or not we can legally put a lien on their business to not allow a certificate of occupancy to be passed on until any fines or anything else is taken care of. That way, it keeps them on top of it, so.
Thank you, sir. Jared?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd like to request an informal report on the crime-free multi-housing program within PD. I heard a lot of good reports about it and just would like to get more information on the program.
Macy? We've already had an exec session. Do you want another one? Okay, with that, we are adjourned. You are free to roam about the country until 6 o'clock.